My wife slapped me before I could speak after her sister lied about me. Now her family's reputation is collapsing under the truth they ignored. It began like any other day. I was listening to the radio in the kitchen. The morning sun streamed in as I swung a spoon into my coffee. I had just brought back fresh bread and Claire's favorite almond milk from the shop. Without thinking, I sang an old song. Life seemed routine and easy, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. The door opened, and I heard it. As usual, I assumed it was Morgan, Claire's sister, stopping by without warning. Morgan had a habit of entering our house as if she were a renter. I didn't mind that she didn't look me in the eye most of the time. For the sake of Claire, I put up with her. She was apprehensive and wide-eyed though, and her energy was unusual that morning. Claire was standing behind her, her face tense as though someone had just passed away. With my coffee cup still warm in my fingers, I carefully turned around, prepared to greet the dawn. However, I never had the opportunity. In 7 words, Morgan stated, "Elias got me pregnant." As simple as that. Her mouth quivered like an unrehearsed play and her voice broke. I was still. The air was still. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. I didn't answer because my brain couldn't believe this was true, not because I felt guilty. Was this some sort of joke? Claire asked me no questions. In my opinion, she didn't look for the truth. She twisted her face in disdain. Her first action was to slap me. The mug fell out of my fingers and shattered on the tile floor as her palm struck my cheek with such force that my head wrenched sideways. I didn't even touch my face with my hand. I was too shocked because the lady I loved had changed into a stranger in front of my eyes. Not because it hurt. I croaked, finding my voice at last. "Claire. What on earth are you?" However, her brothers barged in as though they had been waiting outside before I could finish. With their linebacker physiques, Caleb and Marco were constantly trying to prove themselves. They made no inquiries. Like a stray dog slogging in dirt on white carpets, they simply seized me by the arms and pulled me through the house. I was still in my old t-shirt, still barefoot, and still attempting to process what had just transpired. I mumbled, "Get your hands off me." But my voice was faint. They weren't paying attention. Caleb unexpectedly hit me in the stomach after we were outside. I saw stars as Marco pushed me so hard into the fence. I didn't defend myself. I have no idea why. Perhaps I ought to have. Perhaps I ought to have screamed, called them out, or punched them, but I refrained from doing so. Windows were peered at by neighbors. It was filmed by someone across the street. Just before Caleb spat at my feet and said, "You sick freak," I saw the sparkle of a phone camera. My vision dimmed, but not from pain but rather from embarrassment. A shame that was forced into my throat even though it wasn't mine. I was left alone, humiliated, and injured by them. I went outdoors but Claire didn't follow. She did not ask if I was able to stand. With her arms folded and her wedding ring still on her hand, she stood in the doorway as if it held significance. She seemed as though she had already buried me in her thoughts with a mixture of hurt and certainty. I hobbled over to the street's edge. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from folks I hadn't communicated with in several months. I didn't answer any calls. I was at a loss for words. Hey, amusing thing. It seems that I had already been tried and found guilty before my wife's sister accused me of something heinous. I packed a bag and headed back inside. I didn't try to explain or say goodbye. What was the purpose? The truth was not what they desired. They were looking for someone to blame. You believe that love equates to protection, so you spend your life creating a home. However, if it's simpler than asking difficult questions, people will turn against you. I looked down at my shaking hands and then at the broken mug on the floor. I was covered in blood. I couldn't tell from the punches or the broken ceramic, it made no difference. After taking a shower, I put a towel around my ribs and used soap to write the words, "You didn't even ask," on the bathroom mirror before leaving. No yelling, no spectacular departure. Just a guy leaving the life he believed to be true with a broken jaw and a hollow heart. I simply knew that I couldn't stay, but I had no idea where I was heading. It's funny because you believe you'll realize when your life starts to fall apart. It only took a lie and a smack, but perhaps there will be sirens or some internal alert. A portion of me was murdered by that smack, and it didn't only hit my face. It said that if you stay long enough to hear the truth, it will release you. I went to a tiny public library 2 days after I departed to check my email. Just attempting to update passwords, cancel subscriptions, and access my accounts. Nothing major. Then I noticed that it was from my company, and that the subject line read, "Notice of Administrative Leave." I read the message 3 times while sitting in that rigid wooden chair with my hood down. The words remained the same. The board has decided it is in the company's best interest to initiate a separation process pending a formal investigation, given the serious allegations circulating online. What allegations? I hadn't made any posts. Other than a motel owner who only cared if my card swiped and a gas station clerk, I hadn't spoken to anyone. However, the rumors had gained traction. I checked social media, which I don't often use. A thread was there were enough hints for anyone who knew us, but no names. Justice, treachery, pregnancy, scandal, married guy, and sister-in-law. Posts containing ambiguous charges, out-of-context quotes, and individuals expressing their thoughts as though they were eyewitnesses. There are men like this everywhere, he is deserving of decay. Why don't more women have credibility? Trash. It was similar to witnessing my own funeral online, where the attendees flung stones rather than flowers. It was just rubbish. My landlord texted me on the third day saying, "Hey man, I'm sorry, just business, but the other tenants are worried." I looked at my phone for a while before typing, "No problem. Because I need you to leave by the end of the week." I said I'll be gone today. And I did. I didn't fight, plead or request more time to clarify. Now I got it. The truth is irrelevant when you're accused of something heinous, especially if you're a man. When people are choosing a side, they typically go with the one that makes them feel good about themselves. The speed at which someone becomes invisible will astound you. I used to go to the bakery down the street every morning. Mrs. Ingram, the proprietor, was a kind elderly woman who used to smile as she handed me my coffee. She froze in mid-pour as I stepped in one morning. 3 people were behind me when she murmured, "We're closed today," after glancing at me, and then down at the counter. "That's him," a woman at the corner table muttered, and I left without a word. My phone was essentially worthless by day 5. I was blocked by Claire. Margot, her mother, and all of our friends had also done so. From my connections, even people I hardly knew disappeared. They seemed to be afraid that the rumor might spread to them. During a heat wave, I once assisted Margot in moving a whole patio set. She referred to me as the family's most trustworthy man. "Some men are wolves in family clothing," she wrote in a Facebook post on blood betrayal. Wolves. I had lost my humanity. Following the slap, the beating and the embarrassment, I had remained silent. However, something little and final snapped inside me when I read that. In order to protect myself, I wanted to yell, fight back, post screenshots, texts, voicemails and everything else. But since I had nothing to prove, I had nothing. There were no covert encounters, no flirtations, and no proof because the alleged incident never occurred. However, there was no need for proof. There was greater excitement in the lie. That night, I got a call from a college friend. He was among the few people who hadn't abandoned me yet. With caution he said, "Hey man. I don't want to bother you, but did you actually?" I ended the call before he could finish. I didn't want to speak with him again if he had to ask after 10 years of knowing me. I stayed at a budget motel close to the city's perimeter. Hours passed while I gazed at the discolored ceiling, my thoughts racing like a broken fan. How could a man's entire life be destroyed by a single sentence? I reflected on the times I had spent so openly sharing. I arrived early for family gatherings. After Claire's cousin moved, I made him some furniture. Morgan told me I missed a screw as she looked through her phone while I assisted her in installing a bookshelf. I was now a phantom in everyone's mind. They could despise and forgive this nightmare version of me. There was only a tale, no trial, no court date, and no report. Once established, it required only whispers, rather than sunlight. It had nothing to do with fairness. It was more about passing judgment and appearing to believe women than it was about learning the truth. Morgan also did a good job in her role. A friend of a friend told me that she was getting gifts as a token of sorrow. People praised her bravery as they checked in. I felt like throwing up when I saw the word survivor on her social media bio. I wasn't even texted by Claire. Not once. I discovered that I couldn't afford to remain where I was for much longer after looking at my bank account. The employer froze my severance pay. Rumors of legal action circulated. For what purpose? I had no idea. That's when I started to feel afraid. It's the dread of forgetting, not the fear of hatred. A name that conveyed only embarrassment. That night I hardly recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. There were patches in my beard. I had lifeless eyes. It made me seem bad. That scared me because I wondered what the outside world thought of me if I looked that way to myself. You believe that everything goes wrong at once. It doesn't. Layer by layer, it gradually becomes apparent that no one is coming to your aid. You will need to change completely if you wish to live. I bought a one-way ticket, sold the rest, and packed a little suitcase. There is no forwarding address. No logical destination. Only a short distance away, from the slap, from the lie, and from those who allowed it to spread like wildfire as I stood in the center, blazing. It's time to let go when even your name starts to seem burdensome. I entered a tiny travel agency that morning that was sandwiched between a pawn store and a laundromat. As if it hadn't been rung in years, the bell above the door jangled. Behind the counter, a young woman raised her head from a crossword problem. "To where?" she inquired. I paused. "Anywhere but here," I muttered. She chuckled as though I were kidding, but I wasn't. I required a ticket, guidance, and an opportunity to vanish. I was riding a bus to a town I couldn't pronounce by the end of the day. My old laptop, 2 changes of clothes, a pair of boots, and a brown leather notebook full of journal entries, sketches, and mementos of the man I once was were all in a duffel bag with a fictitious name. It was a long, silent ride. I watched the scenery shift from my seat toward the rear. A shoreline that seemed to go on forever was followed by forests, barren pastures, and city buildings. I stopped keeping track of the hours at some point. I didn't get any sleep. I ate very little. I merely gazed and pondered. It's peculiar. Peace isn't the quiet that descends after your life blows up. Not initially. The fog is numb. Confusion and remorse can reverberate more loudly when there is no sound. I mentally relived the slap, the lie, and how quickly everyone turned away, as if they had been waiting for an excuse to despise me. I pondered whether they recognized something in me before I did. Did I seem too calm, too helpful, or too forgetful? Easy to forget was the final notion that stuck out the most. By the time I reached my destination, the fog outside had increased. On a small coastal route, the bus was one of only 2 cars. I didn't mind when the driver stated, "Last stop," as he pulled into a dirt lot. It was a little, isolated location without cell towers, just wooden buildings that hadn't been painted since the 1980s, an inn that functioned as a diner, and a bay with ancient boats chained like sleeping dogs. Trying not to attract notice, I carried my duffel bag over my shoulder as I strolled through the town. On a porch, a man smoking a cigarette was repairing a net. He saw me walk by and nodded. I returned the nod. I asked the innkeeper if they rented rooms weekly. After giving me a thorough examination, she stated, "Cash only." I gave her money for the first 2 weeks and inquired if she knew anyone in need of assistance. "It depends on the type of assistance," she stated. I answered, "Anything that keeps me moving." She pointed across the harbor. "Try the dock." Ben, an elderly guy, employs people to clean his equipment. Ben made no inquiries. He simply gave me gloves and gestured toward a pile of fishing nets that had a salty, rotten scent. For the first time in weeks, no one stared, no one murmured, and no one passed judgment when I arrived at work. I was just a man with gloves and a duty. I toiled till my hands grew raw, and my back ached. After that, I went back to my room, lay down on the thin mattress, and gazed at the ceiling till I fell asleep. My new routine was that: work, wake up, and sleep in Washington. Nothing except fog, salt, perspiration, and silence. No news, no updates, no internet. And that was sufficient for a time. I kept my true name a secret. My name was Ford. It felt easier and cleaner. No one inquired, and I didn't bring up my background. On few evenings I strolled down the beach. I let the wind to numb my face as I inhaled the chilly air. On other evenings, I jotted down notes. Not whole entries, just snippets. One word. A sentence. Or an idea. I didn't want to recall at times. My goal was to rebuild. People began to recognize me in town, not the traditional manner. Simple welcomes, no whispering, no sympathy. "Good morning, Ford. Are you on duty at the West Dock today? You take coffee with sugar or cream?" They only wanted me there, not my narrative. It was also novel. I discovered more room in my head the more I kept to myself. I started going for a morning run. A few minutes at first, then 30 minutes, and finally 5 Fords. The agony was pleasant. It was logical. My legs trembled and my lungs burned, but I chose to endure the pain. A battle for meaning. A few months later, I started repairing the town's damaged gutters, sheds, and boats. June, a woman, contacted me to assist her in updating her company website. She persisted even after I informed her I wasn't a big techie. I was able to figure it out after watching videos, reading forums, and using a laptop that I borrowed from the library. One shopkeeper then requested for assistance, followed by another. Something had changed, but I was unaware of it at the time. I chose to be invisible this time. I was no longer the accused Elias. I was Ford, the man who had time, tools, and no trail to follow. After work one evening, I watched the boat sway beneath a deep blue sky from the pier. Like a hidden mirror, the water reflected the stars as they started to emerge. Claire was on my mind. I pondered whether she regretted it or missed me. But since it no longer mattered, I ignored the thought. This moment, this silence, this new me being forged from the ruins of my former self, that was what mattered. Just fog, salt, and silence. No headlines. No group conversations, no slaps, no screaming, and the methodical, gradual transformation into a person that no one could take away. The name Ford was no longer merely a ruse, it turned into a start. At first I didn't have a compelling justification for choosing it. In a charity container near the pier, I discovered an old work shirt with simply the name on it. Blue cotton with faded characters. It had been sewn long before I did. I never corrected the villagers when they began to call me by that name. It's funny how identity can develop from nothing. I wasn't just getting by the end of my first year in that port town shrouded in fog. I was reviving, slowly and cautiously. That winter Ben, the sour old fisherman who initially hired me, suffered a stroke. Clara, his daughter, returned to aid in his recuperation. She didn't smile much and was stern and sensible, which I liked. She said, "You're good with numbers, right?" One evening as we were closing the nest shed, I gave a shrug. "Decent." She threw a notebook smeared with salt on the table. Ben's inventory was a jumble, half scrawled, half remembered. Try making sense of that. I spent the night gathering receipts, redoing his books, and sorting out fishing permits that had expired. I gave Clara a tidy spreadsheet and a basic digital ledger the following morning. Her gaze expanded. "You completed this in a single night." I gave a nod. She gazed at the display. "Have you ever considered doing something other than cleaning nets?" In actuality, I had considered it in private throughout the dark hours of restless evenings. I had always been interested in coding, but I had never had to depend on it. I was too busy in my previous life as the trustworthy spouse, the gutter-fixing son-in-law, and the employee who kept everything going but never lifted his hand. But I had time here. It was time to construct something that belonged to myself. I registered the domain amrayafesh.com that evening. Just enough to commemorate the initials I left behind and the man I aspired to be, but not my true name. I began modestly by creating websites for nearby companies, such as a cafe, a flower shop, and a boat rental agency. My face was hidden from the clients. They made no inquiries, they simply enjoyed the outcome. I rented a tiny workshop on the outskirts of town as cash came in. The windows were dusty and the floorboards were ancient. I purchased a fan heater, a kettle, a folding desk, and a used PC. It was mine. Even though it wasn't fancy. I was reminded that I was still here, still capable, and still building with each screw I inserted into the wall. I became the unofficial IT man for the entire coastal strip without any prior arrangement. Word got out. When he arrived, a man from 2 towns over needed assistance starting an internet business to sell his handcrafted furniture. A former educator desired to launch a blog. A young mother desired to create a website with recipes. I never refused. I wasn't cheap. I was fair. People made their payments on schedule. They never inquired, "Where are you from?" and instead handed me stories, bread and coffee. I wasn't sure whether they were being courteous or if they acknowledged that I was now one of them. The company expanded in silence. I developed a distinct brand. I also printed A.M. Reeves Tech on the back of the bibs of the competitors and sponsored a little local event. I once showed a new digital system I had created to assist in tracking public repairs during a town council meeting. Previously erased, Elias Ford is now being praised in front of a room full of strangers who are unaware of the controversy that once killed me. As the sun sank behind the cliffs, I left the meeting and made my way to the harbor's edge. Like melting gold, the water shone. After removing my shoes, I stood in the sand and let my toes to be touched by the tide. And I sobbed because I had accomplished what I believed was impossible, not because I was sad. I created a version of myself that no one could deny, misrepresent, or ruin. A man with only a present he was at last permitted to possess and no past. However, there was a whisper of the past with each step ahead. The smack, Tessa's expression, and the way her brothers hauled me out like trash are all things I occasionally dream about. I would wake up with my pulse pounding and sweating, half expecting to see a throng outside holding torches made of memories or a notice beneath my door. However, nobody showed up. In actuality, humans don't pursue ghosts, and I had voluntarily chosen to become one. I did not, however, divulge my secrets. The notebook in which I used to write about suffering had changed. Plans, Wireframes and checklists were now stored there. I always carried a small USB drive that was taped with old black tape inside its back cover. It contained the recording I got 6 months after going missing, which was sent by a mutual acquaintance who was unaware of the seriousness of what they were sending. Morgan's voice, mocking, confessing, laughing. I informed them that he did it because I detested their perception of his perfection. He treated me as if I were unimportant. I turned him into nothing then. I gave it a listen once. I did not scream or cry. I simply listened. I then supported it. I secured it. I held it tight. Not to exact revenge, but to demonstrate that I hadn't dreamed it. One envious woman's falsehood caused the globe to twist in unexpected directions. Healing is not as simple as you may imagine. I didn't yell into the wind or stand atop a mountain. I didn't write angry letters or punch walls. I simply created one system, one website, and one silent triumph at a time. I got 2 locals to assist me. I gave them flexible hours and a good wage. The only thing I had to say when people asked what drove me was, I know what it feels like to have your life ripped away. So, I'm trying to build one no one can take. I occasionally heard a voice that sounded like Tessa's coming from a stranger. Or the name Morgan would make me freeze. However, both the town and I moved on. It was like taking back a piece of myself to fix every cable, assist with digitizing every boat, and fix every broken login. Ford is a new man, not the old me. I just responded to my own reflection this time. The sound is the first thing I recall. It wasn't just any knock. It felt like someone smashing fists against a wall, frantic and desperate. As I negotiated arrangements for a long-term upgrade, my hands froze on the keyboard. Even though the cursor flickered, I got to my feet. I took one look out the window. Sheets of rain fell, furious and heavy. The streets became rivers. As I got closer to the entrance, I heard thunder crack overhead. There were 3 more bangs. A familiar voice sounded muffled. On the knob, my hand hesitated. After more than 3 years, I finally heard the name. Elias, please. The voice cracked, trembling under strain. It was raw and worn out, but it was definitely hers. Claire. I opened the door gently because I had no idea what was behind it, not because I was unsure. This is what I had envisioned. Not frequently, but frequently enough to demonstrate how much her ghost's presence in my past was essential to my recovery. She was drenched, her hair stuck to her face, and her eyes were wide with sorrow and remorse. She held herself together by putting her arms around herself. Please, she said in a tremulous voice. I know you're in there. I didn't respond. As the storm roared, we simply gazed at one another. She seemed so little, and I remembered how I used to have hurried to take her inside, dry her hair, and cover her with a blanket. However, that man was no longer at home. She extended her hand and touched the doorframe. She said, I've been trying to find you. For years. Without surprise but without faith, I arched an eyebrow. I moved out of the way. After hesitating, she entered the house as if she were returning to a place that had forgotten her scent. It was a clean, warm room. Now, all I had was a desk, a couch, and a few framed pictures of sunrises from my runs. I had no ties to anyone except myself. She was standing clumsily in the center, spilling rainfall on the ground. How did you come across me? I asked bluntly. She turned her head away. Time was needed. Numerous dead ends. I needed to hire someone. I needed to try when I understood the truth. I closely observed her, putting her statements to the test. She nodded, her eyes starting to well up but holding back. I came not to quarrel. You had to come visit me. I had to give an explanation. After walking to my workstation, I took out a tiny USB drive. I had never before shown anyone the proof. I gave it to her and muttered, I already know everything. She gazed at it as if it were going to burn her. What is it? Even though she already knew, she asked. Take it. Play it now. Come back tomorrow if you would still like to discuss after that. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded and received it with quivering fingers. I went back to my workstation, took a seat, and concentrated on the screen. She vanished in an instant. I heard her sneakers sloshing in the rain and the door closing. The wind seemed to want in as well, pressing against the glass. Then there was quiet. For hours, I sat in the silence. I didn't look at the time or my phone. As the storm subsided into a gentle rain, I simply gazed out the window. I didn't get any sleep that night. Staring at the ceiling, I laid on the couch. I considered every life I had led since that slap. Since her silence became more audible than the lie, and since her brothers brutally abused me. What was she hoping to discover here? A dude in the waiting room? A heart that remained pliable? Is a soul still open? I had no idea. However, I was aware that I was no longer her spouse. Not in a spiritual, emotional, or legal sense. The following morning was shrouded in fog. I didn't check my email or go out. I waited for nothing until I noticed her while sipping a mug of black coffee beside the window. This time, she didn't knock. Like a kid waiting for punishment, she sat on the porch bench with her hands clasped and her head bent. When she noticed me, she looked up. She had a new face. Something had changed. The conflict was over, but so were the tears. The aching was all that was left. She claimed to have played it. I gave a nod. She took a deep breath. I remained silent. I destroyed you. I held up a hand and said, Elias, I didn't know. She blinked quickly, attempting to contain the deluge she hadn't earned the right to let out. You don't have to say it. Do you despise me? Her voice cracked as she asked. I gazed out across the placid ocean. No, I replied. Hatred requires energy. I have run out of things to offer you. She fell to the ground. I didn't move or make contact. I simply walked by her. In 20 minutes, I had a client meeting. Because life had moved on, I was awarded one of the largest contracts I had ever received. I had too. The following day she returned. She didn't knock this time. She simply watched my workshop from the other side of the street while she tried to find the confidence to enter. While I was updating a cybersecurity patch for a client's database, I managed to see her through the blinds. Her presence no longer unnerved me, so I continued typing and working. Nothing was stirred. Curiosity. Like watching a storm pass over a mountain you've already climbed, but without anger or longing. The bell above the door sounded softly as she entered at last. You're occupied, she remarked. Without glancing up, I answered, I'm always busy. She took another step inside and shut the door. The scent of rain-soaked cloth and ocean mist filled the air. Her voice seemed smaller, as if the years abroad had sapped her confidence, and she was still wearing the same coat from yesterday. I didn't sleep, she muttered. All I gave her was the faint hum of the office heater and the sound of fingers on keyboard. She approached the edge of my desk and waited for me to raise my head. She said, I have something to say. I nodded and leaned back. She muttered more to herself than to me, and I was unaware that she was recording it. I didn't think Morgan would come clean. But, I said, she did. Claire replied, the words sticking in her mouth. Yes. Calmly, I informed her. I knew 2 years ago. She blinked at that. What? She staggered back as if I had smacked her with the stillness she had once used as a weapon. I knew 2 years ago about the lie, the recording, about everything. But you didn't say a word. No, I didn't. Why? She inquired, truly taken aback. I answered, because the truth wouldn't change what you did. It would not reverse the slap or take away your brother's criminal behavior of dragging me across the grass. The weeks I spent hiding from a world that spit on me for something I didn't do would not be made better by it. So I said nothing. I wanted to know what mattered more to you. My quiet or your guilt. She covered her mouth, appearing nauseous. Her legs were shaking as I could see. If I had known, I would have arrived sooner. I interrupted. But you didn't want to know. You keep omitting that section. You didn't ask. You had no doubts. You didn't flinch at all. Before I could say anything else, you picked her over me. With her face pallid and her shoulders slumped, she took a seat in the chair across from me. She sobbed. Eliasne, she responded. Morgan sobbed. She also said that you hatefully gazed at her. That she was cornered by you. That she was unable to say no. I squinted. And you decided I deserved to be ruined based on that alone. I was afraid, she said abruptly. I was unsure of what to believe. She sounded so broken by the way she said it. So did I remarked icily. She parted her lips, then shut them. She did not cry, but her eyes glistened. I remarked, you didn't return for the truth. You lost everything else, so you returned. That made her wince. It touched down. Leaning forward, I spoke evenly. I am aware of your divorce. I am aware that your family betrayed you. I am aware that your mother referred to it as an old scandal and advised you to move on. I am aware that Marco's business failed after Caleb was exposed for that incident at the school. I know since I didn't say anything. And the truth had time to gain traction on its own while I remained silent. Her lips quivered, but she remained silent. I went on, you didn't return out of regret. You needed something to feel clean again, so you came back. No, she muttered. That isn't accurate. It is, I said. And it's all right. It doesn't make me angry. Simply put, I'm not providing you what you came for. She appeared perplexed. What do you suppose I was here to do? Redeeming? I said. Closure? Perhaps even forgiveness. I hesitated, allowing our silence to deepen. However, you are unaware that I have long since forgiven you. For my sake, not yours. I was forced to. I wouldn't have made it through otherwise. However, forgiving does not imply reconciliation. It doesn't mean welcome. I simply stopped acting as though I was responsible for your conduct. Claire put her hands over her face and her shoulders trembled. She simply sat there for a moment, allowing herself to be vulnerable in front of me. There was just a lady buried behind the debris of her own choices, no makeup, no audience, no show. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it when she eventually turned back to face me. Do you think this can ever be fixed? I cocked my head in an honest, not irate manner. No, I replied. Slowly, she nodded. I understand, she muttered. I'm worthy of that. I uttered the words. No one deserves to be lied about like I was. However, mistakes are made by humans. The issue is that you created yours and left me to foot the bill. We remained seated for an additional minute. Only space, breath, and all the unseen things that had existed between us for too long were left. No more words. At last she fixed her coat and stood up. I'm going now, she declared. I gave a nod. Look after yourself. She glanced back one more time before opening the door. She said, I hope you find happiness. I have already, I answered. And I meant it. She went out. The man who had survived both said, just the truth and silence. No more begging, no more promises, no more twisted stories. How long she stayed on my porch the following day is unknown to me. However, she was already sitting on the bench with her back straight and her hands clutched in her lap like a child awaiting judgment when I eventually went outside. She first ignored me in favor of concentrating on the gravel path that led from my feet to the road. The morning air was cold from the mist of the night as I stood in the doorway. Overhead birds were chirping. The town was just starting to wake up, with early morning joggers and a few dock workers calling hello over the lake. But the only sound I could hear was our stillness. Once a source of comfort, that old familiar silence now hung taut between two rocks like a wire. Something was gone from her eyes when she eventually looked up. Pride, perhaps. Perhaps the final fragment of the tale she had attempted to preserve in her memory. She answered, I listened to it. I didn't answer. I kept listening to her voice. What frightened me the most was that it didn't sound like her. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. Not now. I didn't recognize that version of Morgan. I never wanted to see it, or perhaps it was the only authentic version. I entered the porch but chose not to sit. I owed her no consolation. I simply had to give myself closure. Claire mutely remarked. She was laughing, as she gazed at the wooden floor. Just laughing as if she had done the world's most ingenious trick. That's what it was to her, so I nodded slowly. Her face, God, her face, carried years when she finally turned to face me. She swallowed a falsehood so deeply that it became a part of her after years of denial. And now the truth had sliced through that deception. Scar tissue was all that remained. She claimed she did it because you treated her as though she didn't exist. She was upset that I didn't want her to notice me. She mistook basic decency for rejection, I replied plainly. Because I wasn't what she needed to feel special, she intended to punish me. Claire shut her eyes. She also detested me. You know, she said, I think that's what I didn't want to believe. It wasn't just about you. It was about both of us. What we had, and what we meant to her. Possibly, I replied. But that doesn't change what she did, or what you did after. She groaned. I caught sight of her. She inhaled slowly, feeling her chest lift. Whispering, I keep wondering. Her cheeks flushed. That was the question, wasn't it? I could tell by the way she asked it that she already knew the answer. If she hadn't confessed, if that recording hadn't been made, would I have ever seen it? Would I have had to live with the version of you that she painted in my mind? The one that I helped make real? She didn't dispute, saying, I recall, in a firmer voice. The day it all happened. You returned because the illusion fell apart, I said. Not because you were looking for the truth, but simply because you had nothing else to cling to. I keep reliving it in my head. You had coffee in your hand. I didn't see that at the time, but you were composed and perplexed. I just realized I had a challenge to tackle. And the issue was, you. There's something people don't understand about betrayal. I continued slowly, glancing out toward the dock, where the sea shimmered in the early sun. It's not just the lie. Even the slap isn't it. It's the velocity. The speed at which someone finds you guilty. How quickly they discard everything that you have ever been to them. That's what breaks you. She nodded while letting the tears fall down her cheeks without wiping them away. I didn't correct her or comfort her. She added, I ruined you. Again, barely audible. Sometimes people need to sit in the mess they made. She went on. I kept telling myself that maybe it wasn't as horrible as it felt, that maybe it was just an error. But everything I had put in place to defend myself was destroyed when I heard her voice mocking and expressing pride in what she had done. I'm not here to fix anything, she continued. I know that's not possible. And she stood slowly, as though the weight of her confession was pressing against her joints. Nor am I here to beg for your pardon. I'm not worthy of it. After listening to that recording, all I needed to do was look you in the eye to let you know that I now knew. I really looked at her, and what I saw was not the woman I had once loved. The wife who had snuck her cold feet under my legs at night or laughed at my poor cooking, who had died the same day the lie was born, but a stranger who had, as she herself claimed, walked through fire and come out burned, but perhaps at last honest. She nodded and said, I know. She exited the porch and glanced around once. For what it's worth, I hope the life you built now gives you peace. There's nothing left to rebuild, I answered. I let her name linger for a moment before answering. It does. And then I stepped back inside and shut the door behind me. Not in a resentful or angry manner, but simply because you deserve it, Elias. The tape showed what had always existed between us. Doubt, distance, the kind of love that crumbles under the first blow because it was never strong enough to survive honesty. I had survived it without her, without all of them. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your name is to stop asking others to spell it correctly. There would be no rekindled love, no dramatic apologies, and no hugs in the rain. However, Claire stayed, not in my house, not even on my street, but in the town, after renting a small place from the innkeeper who helped her settle in, and then from Clara at the net shed, who saw her buying groceries with unsteady hands. I had assumed that after the tape, after the final confrontation, that would be the last time I saw her. She didn't walk around with her head held high. There was no arrogance, just a stillness, as if someone was trying not to disturb the air. She started tutoring kids after school, volunteered at the town clinic and helped clean up the beach after storms. I didn't go looking or ask why she stayed, but I noticed. I watched from a distance, not because I was interested in her redemption story, but because I was trying to figure out why I wasn't angry anymore. The locals didn't know who she was to me at first, and she didn't tell them, but small towns have long memories and even longer whispers. A few people made the connection, even though she didn't ask to be close to me or knock again. Instead, she simply appeared in the world I had created, quietly, as if she knew she was walking through something delicate and sacred that wasn't hers. I always responded the same way. I can't take her away from me. They nodded, and that was all. She's just here. The memory of who she used to be briefly flashed through my mind when I saw her at the farmer's market one afternoon. She was carrying a bag of apples and laughing softly with one of the older women who sold honey. The sun caught her hair, and I nodded back. That was the new language between us. No words, no open wounds, just acknowledgement. It was like two travelers who once traveled the same path but now went in different directions. Weeks went by. Then months. She earned her place in the town, just like I had, by doing the work and not asking for anything. People started asking more about my business and less about her, and my clientele increased. I hired a third developer, upgraded my equipment, and even began giving talks about online resilience and digital identity at the local college. I never mentioned my past, but everything I said came from it. The answer always sat like a stone in my stomach. No, she wouldn't have. Her return wasn't born out of faith, rather, it was born out of fallout, and forgiveness, as much as people like to preach, doesn't make that go away. Still, in the silence of my evenings, I couldn't get rid of the ache of one question. Would she have come if Morgan hadn't confessed? I could forgive her for being human, for being naive, for making a decision under duress, but I couldn't forget that she let me fall first when everything fell apart, choosing to believe a lie over the man who had held her through her darkest moments, who had helped her mother when she broke her hip, who had used his fingers to trace maps on her back and his eyes closed to plan dreams. I no longer hated her, but I also lost trust in her, and trust was the one thing forgiveness couldn't restore. She came over to me as I was shutting up the workshop one evening when the sun was setting behind the lighthouse, the sky bruised purple, the waves softly lapping the dock. "Do you mind?" She pointed to the wooden bench by the stairs and said, "It's a public bench." She sat next to me, but not too close. I shrugged. I was surprised when she remarked, "I'm not trying to win you back." "I know," I said. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For keeping my identity a secret from everyone." I glanced at her and realized for the first time that she wasn't here to be forgiven. Rather, she was here to bear the burden that she should have had long ago. "For allowing me to exist here without dragging your story behind me like chains." "I needed peace, which is why I kept it quiet for you," I added. She nodded, saying, "I never asked you that day when I slapped you, when it all started." She paused, trying to find the right words, then said, "What were you going to say before everything went sideways?" "Retelling the worst parts of my life to strangers doesn't bring that." "I was going to ask what the hell you were talking about," I replied, gazing out at the ocean. I felt it had to be a joke because it was so unexpected. I was taken aback. That's all. I was not even given the opportunity to defend myself. Claire averted her eyes in embarrassment, and I went on without posing a single query. "You struck me. You allowed them to pull me out. You allowed it to occur." "I know," she said in a whisper. I said, "And you've got to live with that, not because I intend for you to suffer but rather because it's the result. That is the result of decisions we are unable to reverse." We sat in quiet once more until she stood up as the sky grew darker. "This will be the last time I talk to you directly," she said. "I needed to say those things, but I'll respect the space you've created." "I do live with it," she continued. "Every day. I will not meddle." She paused, turned slightly, and grinned, saying, "Thank you." I nodded, and as she turned to leave, I added one last thing. "You're doing good work at the clinic." She then disappeared into the dusk haze, never to be seen again. As I sat on the bench and listened to the wind, the tide and the creak of the dock, I reflected on everything we had experienced. The lies, the fall, and the return. It dawned on me that closure doesn't come with big apology or tidy endings. Rather, it comes in bits and pieces, in nods across marketplaces, in shared silence, and in distance kept not out of rage, but out of knowledge. I never really wanted revenge. It's a messy word, bloated with bitterness, dripping with energy I no longer had to give. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I didn't want to make them hurt the way I had. I just wanted the truth to live. So I let it. Forgiveness can clear the air. But it doesn't rebuild bridges. Sometimes peace is just knowing you don't have to try anymore. I was at my desk drinking lukewarm coffee, browsing a forum on small business cybersecurity, when I noticed a trending article on one of the discussion boards. "False accusation ruins man's life until truth surfaces." It began on a calm Tuesday afternoon, when the fog had rolled in thickly over the docks, swallowing the horizon in a soft gray hush. It was my story, posted anonymously with no names or photos, just details, frightfully accurate ones, about a man who was accused by his sister-in-law of getting her pregnant, betrayed by his wife and family, beaten, fired, and shunned, only to disappear, start over, and later find out the whole accusation was false. I clicked it out of habit, but what I saw wasn't a coincidence. An audio file with Morgan's smug confession was attached at the bottom. "I told them he did it because I hated how perfect they thought he was," she said. Word for word, the exact file I had hidden away for more than 2 years. I didn't upload it, but I knew who did. Claire, who must have duplicated it after I gave her the original, perhaps as an attempt to make amends. He looked at me like I was nothing, so I turned him into nothing. Or perhaps she was no longer able to bear the burden by herself. In any case, it was now available on the internet, and could not be put back in its box. The news became viral in a matter of hours, and it was discussed on blogs and in forums. Whether it was real or false was up for debate in the comments, but it made little difference. The confession and the voice were genuine. It didn't take long for people to begin making connections. The murmurs came back, but not in my immediate vicinity. They encircled the individuals who had previously buried me this time. Elena lost her job at a medium-sized public relations business. In a public statement, its CEO said, "We do not tolerate any behavior that undermines the dignity of others." Within a week, she disappeared from social media. Former high school football coach and Tessa's brother Caleb resigned after an anonymous report claimed that he had previously engaged in physical assault based on unverified allegations. The footage of him pulling me outside by my collar was leaked. Like a curse, it reappeared. Margot, their mother, served on the board of a nearby non-profit organization that provided funding for women's shelters. Her public remarks, "Some men are wolves in family clothing," made prior to any investigation, were discovered by the board, and she was asked to resign. Despite never having seen a courtroom, they had to deal with a far harsher ruling: the court of public truth. There were no attorneys or gavels, just a reflection in a mirror of a world that had let them go and didn't want them back. And I said nothing. I did not affirm or deny, I didn't add gasoline or gloat. I simply continued to live, work, and create the life they believed they could destroy. People in town started to treat me with respect instead of sympathy. "I read something online," a single man remarked in the marina. "Didn't mention names, but if it's even half true, I'm sorry for what you went through." All I needed to do was nod. At the cafe, another woman put coffee and a croissant on my table and added, "On the house." Although there were no significant changes in my life, I did feel as though I was marching with the wind at my back, rather than against it. I saw Claire throughout this period, but she didn't talk to me. She continued to live a quiet life, work at the clinic, and keep her head down. I had no idea how it must have felt for her to see her family fall apart under the weight of the reality they had previously chosen to ignore. Despite having started the fire, she had not left. Without requesting pity, she stood in the ashes and allowed the smoke to burn her eyes. I admired that in a tiny, quiet manner. I got a letter in the mail one morning. Just text scribbled on pristine white paper, with no handwriting or return address. "You did it that way even though you didn't have to. Rather of using the truth as a weapon, you allow it to breathe. Thank you for not destroying us when you had every right to, even if I don't deserve your charity." Now I see that. And not because I needed to read it again, but rather to remind myself that sometimes justice doesn't come with fire. I folded the paper and put it in a drawer with the others. Quiet, indisputable truth can accompany it at times, and that's sufficient at times. Justice is frequently perceived as being noisy, requiring a stage, a verdict, and a standing audience. However, during those weeks, I discovered this. A whisper of justice can be heard. An online post, a recording was released, just a nod from someone who was once skeptical of you. Not all justice results in punishment, sometimes it simply comes out. People are unable to turn away once it is shown. They must accept what they observe. Caleb, Margot, and Elena all experienced that. They were not imprisoned, they received no fine, but they were seen by everyone. They were seen by the truth. More significantly, they recognized themselves. A teenager, who appeared to be around 17, entered my studio one evening right before closing time. He was apprehensive and shifted uncomfortably. "The truth block was constructed by you?" he inquired. I scowled. "What?" "That story online, about the lie, and how the guy vanished but returned stronger," he muttered. "You mean that?" I didn't have to respond, but I didn't. Slowly, he nodded. "I simply wanted to mention how much that story aided me. This year I nearly gave up on myself. People believed that I had done something that I hadn't. I also began to believe it." He took out a drawing pad from his rucksack. "I was instructed by my teacher to sketch something that gave me strength once more. This is what I sketched." He showed me a page with a faceless man standing in a storm with his feet firmly planted and lightning behind him. As stated in the description, truth doesn't flinch. I looked at it for a while. "You hold on to that strength," I murmured, shaking his hand as I rose up. "Don't allow them to change who you are." He grinned as he went, and I took a seat behind my desk, feeling a peculiar sense of serenity. The reason I had never uploaded the recording myself suddenly occurred to me. The reason I waited. The reason I had rebuilt first. Because understanding what they did isn't the only thing that constitutes justice. It's about knowing who you are, regardless of what somebody may have said. People in our world can be divided into two categories: those who choose who they become, and those who are shaped by their circumstances. I thought I was the first ones. I tried to be decent, trustworthy, and helpful back then. I believed that those around me would notice me if I loved deeply, gave generously, and forgave quickly enough. They would support me. However, they failed to hold out when the storm hit. I fell when they released me. The problem with falling, though, is that occasionally you hit something solid. Yourself. I still get up early these days. I enjoy the silence before the town awakens, not because I'm haunted anymore. As I patiently boil my coffee, I observe the fog rolling across the bay in the morning. I don't immediately check my phone. I don't follow the news or look through headlines. I sit, take a deep breath, and tell myself that making headlines is not the way to find peace. It comes without the necessity of being seen. Most mornings I choose to walk into town because I can. Not because I have to. These days, I get greetings from people that are carefree and judgment-free. I earned that, but it took years. I won't prove my innocence. Not by yelling my version of events. However, by leading a life that rendered the falsehood inconsequential. Sometimes I walk by the clinic and catch a glimpse of Claire through the window. Our eyes occasionally connect, and when they do, we both nod. No more, no less. She's generally hunched over a clipboard or caring for one of the town's kids. I appreciated her more for keeping her word than for offering an apology, since she never again crossed the line, spoke up, or attempted to change the truth. You can't outrun your mirror. Not forever. Morgan tried to reinvent herself, moved to a different place, and changed her name online. I know her family is now dispersed. Last I heard, Caleb works as a part-time teacher someplace. Margot travels most of the time, perhaps in search of locations where no one can identify her. I stayed, built, and now own 3 buildings in the town. A couple who were creating a podcast studio rented one, while a marine gear provider rented another. These days my tech company has clients in 6 countries and operates virtually exclusively online. I didn't have to heavily promote myself because the facts and the work spoke for themselves. Healing isn't loud, which is the part that no one tells you when your life is on fire. Banners, thunder, and cheering are not included. Healing is silent, discreet, and occurs in everyday situations, such as coding while drinking tea, choosing a new office chair, or assisting a stranger with carrying things upstairs. About a year after the tale became viral online, a local school contacted us one afternoon. They were planning a youth program on resilience and digital ethics. They requested me to speak because they had witnessed the life I created and believed it could motivate the children, not because they were familiar with my narrative. Yes, I said, and a dozen young faces gazed up at me as I entered the room. Some were interested, some were bored, and some were excited. I told them about my adventure, cleaned of course, and without mentioning slander or treachery. I talked about making a fresh start, about losing everything and deciding to learn rather than give up. How do you stop being angry at the people who ruined your life? One child inquired. You don't, I responded with a smile. You just stop paying them rent in your mind. You no longer accept their behavior as a part of who you are. By creating a life that is too full for them to fit into, you outgrow their control over you. Perhaps he did, since he nodded as if he understood. Perhaps those remarks will mean something to him in the future. I had a cup of hot cider that evening and gazed up at the sky while standing on my porch. There were only stars, no clouds, 1,000 silent lights blinking above me, unconcerned with anything below. I reflected on the man I once was, the one who stood in his kitchen, coffee cup in hand, watching in disbelief as his life fell apart due to a sentence that someone else had made up. I no longer recognized him. He was too sensitive, too eager to please, and too ready to think that love was something that had to be gained rather than something that had to be achieved. And now? I am being purposeful now. With my silence. With my time. With my faith. Months ago, before she finally let go entirely, Claire asked me, "Do you believe we'll ever be able to get back?" At the time I just stared at her without responding. But I would respond as follows if she asked me now. That man with whom you were married. He is no longer there. Without a single question, you slapped him, and he died instantly. The man standing here today is no longer a part of your tale. He composed a fresh one. People believe that the end is survival. However, survival is only the first step, because you begin to wonder what you would become if you stopped trying to be accepted and started being authentic after you understand you can survive being erased. Loyal to your own self-worth, voice, and identity. I no longer live for approval. The version of myself that I nearly lost, the one who picked up the pieces in the dark and figured out how to mold them into something new, is the one I live for. I go by Elias Ford. I was accused, assaulted, erased, and left behind. I didn't remain buried, though. I returned to determine who I wanted to be without anyone else's approval, not to prove a point or exact retribution. And this time, I totally, boldly, and unapologetically answered to my own name. Maybe you have some new questions now that you've heard the story today. Or perhaps some old recollections have been evoked. We are all connected by the new stories that are created on Reddit every day by new experiences and moments. Everybody has a different life path, and we all attempt to comprehend the world in our own manner. Moments like these serve as a reminder that we are all human, happy, sad, and constantly learning new things. Please feel free to tell your friends about this story if you liked it. We constantly value your opinions and suggestions since they inspire us to produce even better material. Every tale has a different viewpoint, and we want to make sure that our material is relatable and diverse by understanding everyone's viewpoints. These kinds of stories teach us that everyone's journey through life is unique and that we may learn new things from hearing other people's stories. You can also tell us your own tales. We also value the experiences you have. Please share your thoughts if you like this video. Our goal is to consistently produce content that inspires you and provides you with fresh concepts. Your comments are still valued even if you have already watched this video. We can enhance our content and give our audience a fresh viewpoint with each piece of input. What we witnessed today was only a small portion of the numerous tales that were posted globally and on Reddit. It serves as a reminder of how we all attempt to make sense of life by talking to one another about our experiences. This film only served as an illustration of how we attempt to learn about various facets of life and establish connections with others through storytelling. We intend to keep sharing tales like this that foster mutual learning and development. My sister seduced my partner in front of everyone, so I gave her a man who'd leave her $80,000 in debt and wanted by the FBI. I was afflicted with a built-in boyfriend thief on the day my younger sister Diane was born. And I am not referring to borrowed clothing or innocent crushes. I'm talking about the type of theft where if I brought home a lover, she'd have him wrapped around her finger in weeks. If I introduced someone over Sunday dinner, she'd be DMing him before dessert was served. If I share a lovely couple photo on Instagram, she may run into him at his favorite coffee shop the next day. Everyone claimed Diane acquired mom's beautiful beauty, and I received dad's sharp wit. The comparison hurt, but I learned to live with it until the boyfriend stealing began. It started quietly enough in high school. Trevor, my lover, suddenly decided he wanted to study at our place every afternoon. Diane would glide by in her cheerleading uniform, begging him for assistance with her calculus homework. I didn't notice the manipulation because I trusted them both entirely. However, in retrospect, the symptoms were clearly visible. By the time we reached our 20s, Diane's tactics had become surgically precise. I dated Cameron for 6 months before inviting him to meet the family. Diane had a difficulty one week after that horrible meal and needed to cry on his wide shoulder at 2 a.m. They slept together the same night. Then came Marcus from my marketing firm. The same routine: family meal, fabricated emergency, and a midnight comfort session. When I discovered their sensual text conversations, she had the audacity to bend her head and smile softly. "I'm just making sure they're worthy of you, Laurel," she explained, fluttering her eyes. Marcus failed the test miserably. Deep down I realized she had a point. If these men could quit me for my sister so easily, then they weren't my soulmates after all. But that rationale did nothing to alleviate the scorching feeling of betrayal in my chest. Then came Derek, who almost broke me. We had been dating for 2 years, seriously considering marriage after I got my nursing degree. Diane drank heavily at his birthday celebration, which I had prepared for weeks, and kissed him in front of everyone at Applebee's. When he chose her over me, she had the courage to post on Facebook, "There are times when you can't help but fall hard for someone. Sorry, not sorry." Moaned me on Thanksgiving. Her voice is as keen as a carving knife. "You need to stop parading these men in front of Diane," she screamed, stirring the gravy. "She can't resist temptation when it's right in front of her. Why do you keep setting her up for failure?" In my mind, I had not dangled anything. I'd tried to build meaningful relationships, but they crumbled under my sister's constant charm offensive. 3 months later, fate shone upon me at my college roommate's wedding in Chicago. That is where I met Connor. Everything I'd ever wanted wrapped up in a 6'2" bundle. Kind, successful as a software engineer, and seems resistant to female manipulation. For 8 glorious months, I kept him a secret from my family. We drove to adjacent towns for dates, avoided posting couple images, and I told no one about him. I believed I'd finally thwarted Diane's boyfriend-stealing plot. This was the most healthy, honest connection I'd ever had. Connor spoke of our future with such confidence that I began to believe in happy endings again. But then my loose-lipped cousin Amanda accidentally mentioned Connor to Mom during a phone chat, and Mom automatically introduced him to Diane within a few hours. My sister's investigation talents were on par with those of the FBI. She found him within a few days, via his company's website. The treachery hit me like a freight train when I used my key to enter Connor's apartment and discovered them tangled in our bed. The worst part was not catching them in the act. It was Diane's reaction. She sat up, absolutely nude and shameless, and dealt the fatal blow. "Honestly, I did you a great service," she added, gathering her clothes with no regrets. "He hardly lasted 10 minutes. You deserve so much more than that, sis." Connor simply shrugged, without trying to hide himself. "Your sister is just too hot for me not to attempt. You understand, correct? I stood there, quivering with wrath and shame, while Diane kissed him farewell, as if I were invisible, nothing more than furniture in the room. That soul-crushing experience solidified everything for me. Diane did not abduct my lover for sisterly protection or pure attraction. She did it because she could. Because she enjoyed watching me fall. And because sabotaging my happiness had become her strange hobby. Walking to my Honda Civic in the parking lot, my palm trembling so violently that I could hardly hold the keys, I made a decision that would change everything. Diane craved males and couldn't resist them. Okay, I'll give her exactly what she wants. Wrapped in a box that would consume her from the inside out. The concept began to form in my head during the 40-minute drive home. Diane consistently went with the same type. Gorgeous, attractive, and seemingly successful guys made her feel selected and special. She never looked deeper than the surface. Never questioned their histories or backgrounds. That blind spot would be her undoing. I spent the next few weeks thoroughly researching public records, judicial databases, and background check websites. That is how I came across Vincent Romano, a wonderfully gorgeous man who claimed to be a venture entrepreneur from Denver. He recently split after his ex-wife detailed years of financial and emotional abuse in court files. 2 separate restraining orders have been issued against other ex-girlfriends who are currently being investigated for securities fraud. Perfect. Vincent's LinkedIn profile portrayed him as a successful entrepreneur, replete with a professional headshot that could have earned him modeling contracts. But delving deeper, uncovered the truth. A clever con artist who specialized in luring ladies into financial disaster. I made a phony LinkedIn profile for a possible investor, and contacted him with a business pitch. We met at a Starbucks in downtown Denver, where I expertly played the sensitive elder sister character. I showed him Diane's Instagram images, raving about how she constantly stole my boyfriends because she was so attractive. I just can't compete with her, I admitted, my voice cracking with trained emotion. Every guy I've ever loved chooses her instead. I feel so unworthy. Vincent's eyes brightened like a hunter spotting wounded prey. He saw precisely what I wanted him to see. A broken lady he could easily exploit, with a stunning sister who offered the ultimate trophy. You seem like an incredible person, Laurel, he added, leaning across the table to grasp my hand. Any man who would abandon you for someone else is an imbecile. Hook, line and sinker. We started dating right away, with me playing the smitten girlfriend and him laying the framework for his regular con. He showered me with lavish dinners at the Capitol Grill, weekend getaways to Aspen, and promises of a future together. However, I could see from his act that every compliment and gesture was intended to make me emotionally reliant. After 3 weeks of this deception, I told him I wanted to keep our relationship hidden from Diane since she had a habit of taking my men. Then I invited him as my date to my mother's birthday dinner at Olive Garden, well aware of the chain reaction I was initiating. Vincent believed he was playing me, preparing himself to make me his next victim while include Diane as a bonus conquest. He had no idea he was heading into a trap that I had spent weeks crafting. Vincent delivered an outstanding performance at his mother's birthday supper. He treated Diane as if she were invisible, while lavishing me with attention that seemed sincere enough to fool everyone at the table. He complimented my lasagna choice, laughed at my father's horrible jokes, and even brought Mom flowers. But Diane couldn't bear being ignored, especially by such a handsome man. She escalated just as I predicted, caressing Vincent's arm while she spoke, leaning too near when she laughed, and muttering inside jokes that only he could hear. Her flirting grew so evident that even our naive parents took notice. I excused myself to the restroom, where I saw Diane move in for the kill through the slightly cracked door. My sister is sweet, but she's pretty vanilla in every way, she said, sliding her finger over Vincent's forearm. I could show you stuff she wouldn't think of trying. When I returned to the table and saw them exchanging phone numbers, I flung my glass of Merlot Square in Vincent's face and rushed out, crying. The performance of a lifetime, complete with mascara dripping down my cheekbones. Diane called that night. Her voice filled with phony worry that did not fool me for a second. Vincent totally came on to me at dinner, she claimed. But frankly, you're better off without him. Something about him appears very sketchy. Within 2 days, she was sharing Instagram tales from his fancy condo in Cherry Creek. Within a week, she had fallen madly in love with his falsehoods. Within a month, she had moved in totally and given him access to her bank accounts for our joint expenses. I watched everything develop from the sidelines, feeling a mix of contentment and mounting unease. Diane was heading blindly into quicksand, and I had pointed her in that direction. But after years of having my heart broken by her selfishness, I couldn't bring myself to warn her of the danger she was in. The first break in Diane's idyllic new life occurred 6 weeks later, when a lawyer representing Vincent's ex-wife contacted her personally. Vincent had hidden assets during the divorce procedures. Diane could now be held accountable as an accomplice to fraud. They think I might also be sued. Diane contacted me, panic creeping into her voice. But Vincent explained everything. His ex-wife is just bitter and trying to stir problems. I made supportive noises in private, knowing that this was merely the beginning. When it was revealed that Vincent's investment enterprise was an elaborate Ponzi scheme, Diane had already put her whole $30,000 funds. She was convinced she was going in on the ground floor of the next major tech startup when the SEC shut it down, and her money vanished overnight. It must be a mistake, she wept during another late-night call. Vincent's attorneys are challenging it. He promises we'll receive everything back plus interest. However, when Diane attempted to leave his condo after finding additional lies, Vincent revealed his true colors. He gripped her wrist so hard that it snapped, then locked her in the bedroom, ranting about ungrateful women who didn't appreciate anything he'd done for them. When she finally escaped and attempted to access her accounts, she discovered that he had emptied everything, including her checking, savings, and 401k. Worse, he'd stolen her personal information to apply for credit cards and loans in her name, leaving her with $80,000 in debt she had no idea about. The ultimate blow came at dawn on a Tuesday morning when FBI officers knocked down Vincent's condo door. They discovered Diane's signature on scores of fake documents that Vincent had duped her into signing, making her an unsuspecting collaborator in securities fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Diane's name appeared on the screen, but I allowed it to go to voicemail. Diane's voicemail was hardly audible between her cries. "Laurel, please. I'm in county jail, and they say I might go to prison. Vincent used me for everything, and now the FBI believes I was assisting him. I know I have harmed you, but please, I implore you. I need help." I listened to it 3 times before I deleted it. Within a few days, the local news had taken up the story. A local lady has been detained as part of a multi-million-dollar fraud conspiracy. Diane's mugshot appeared on Station 7's evening broadcast. Her mascara smeared and her eyes were sunken with grief. Mom called immediately, hysterical. "You must help your sister. She made mistakes, but she did not deserve this. She made her own decisions," I responded gently. "Just as she did with Cameron, Marcus, Derek, and Connor." The hush between us lasted until Mom said, "You knew, didn't you? You understood who he was." I did not respond since the truth was too complex for a simple yes or no. Had I realized Vincent would kill Diane so completely? Not precisely. Had I adequately investigated him to realize he was dangerous? Absolutely. Diane eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against Vincent. She spent 8 months in minimum security jail and emerged with a felony record, wrecked credit, and a restraining order prohibiting Vincent from contacting her again. The family dinners ceased. Mom couldn't look at me the same way, split between horror at what I'd done and reluctant admiration for my calculated vengeance. Dad simply shook his head whenever Diane's name was mentioned, muttering about natural consequences and chickens coming home to roost. After her release, Diane relocated across the nation to Portland, where she worked as a barista and gradually rebuilt her life. We haven't communicated in 2 years, although I do occasionally check her Instagram. She appears older and more cautious today. Her eyes have lost their arrogant, predatory sparkle and become quieter and more hesitant. Sometimes I wonder whether I went too far, if wrecking my sister's life was worth the thrill of finally winning our bizarre game. But then I recall Connor's shrug, Diane's brazen smugness, and years of watching my happiness erode for her amusement. She finally got what she had been looking for her entire life, a man she couldn't resist. She just didn't expect him to stop destroying everything she valued. I've been in therapy for a year, working through the complex feelings of planning someone's downfall, even someone who had repeatedly injured me. My therapist argues that revenge rarely offers the peace we expect. And she's correct. I do not feel triumphant or vindicated. Mostly I feel hollow where all that rage used to reside. But I can sleep easier knowing Diane will never steal another woman's lover again. Certain lessons may only be learned via total catastrophe. And my sister learned the hard way. CPS took my mom. Because my brother said she was dangerous, but I found the burner phone with 92 messages proving he'd been groomed to lie. My mother pushed me to do only one thing: take screenshots of every text communication. It didn't matter if it was a dispute with a friend or a homework-related text message from peers. At the end of each day, I had to transmit them to her, where she would organize them into a massive database on her computer. She had them all in neat folders, categorized by person, location, time, and date. My younger brother Caleb had to do it as well, beginning when he received his first phone at the age of 10. But my mother was the type to drop me off at my friends' houses and refuse to leave until she saw me walk in, so I could binge watch those films about finding kitty fiddlers. So this wasn't entirely out of character. But then I began to notice something. Every time my stepfather Derek called her out and accused her of cheating, she would pull out the text screenshots like a loaded gun. March 4th, 3:28 p.m. Here I am telling my coworker that I am in a relationship. Instead of apologizing or even simply nodding, Derek would tighten his fists. It seemed as if he was looking for an excuse to be upset. Derek accused me again while my mother was showering. He asked where I was last Saturday. I was shopping with Mom. I know you're covering up for your idiot mother, he said, lifting his fist to lash out at me. And just as I was bracing for a hit, my mother burst in. Wait, she added, before showing him texts we had about going to the mall, as well as a conversation with her sister about how funny it was that we ran into her at, the mall. Derek growled before walking away. She attempted to deceive me by claiming that Derek had low blood sugar, which caused him to lose control. But I knew that if that screenshot hadn't kept me safe, I'd be in school the next day with a black eye. Instead of confronting her, I smiled with the most innocent expression I could muster. Oh, okay. You and Derek are so cute together, I remarked. I wanted to know what Derek was up to, and I knew that by being ignorant, my mother would not try to hide anything from me. However, even screenshots and continual tiptoeing couldn't stop the bruises. I vividly recall the first time I realized something was wrong. We were in the middle of playing Mario Kart, and I lifted my hand to celebrate after I won. But as soon as I did that, I noticed my mother flinch. It only lasted a split second, yet it was still there. The next day, when her sleeve slipped, I noticed the distinct appearance of yellow and green bruises all around her arm. My heart ached, and I was overcome with the old feeling of hatred for my biological father. When they were still together, my mother worked as a receptionist at his dental business. Outside of that, she would perform all of the motherly tasks. It was the ideal situation, until he abandoned us for one of his clients and began a new family. And because my mother signed a prenup, he left us with nothing. Derek entered the picture a few months later, and they were married within weeks of meeting each other. My mother and I were both persuaded he was unique, until he began to spew nonsense. But all of this meant that my mother couldn't simply leave him. So now we were stranded. For a while, I just focused on becoming a second father in the house, safeguarding Caleb, and gently comforting my mother in ways that didn't reveal that I knew what was going on. Because if he wanted to gather our texts, I would ensure that he never texted again. And it all started when I licked his A. Whenever he yelled at my mother, I'd text him and create a chat about how useless she is. When he felt my mother was cheating, I told him that he deserved more, and he ate it up every time. So much so that he stopped asking for my texts because he didn't want to be caught expressing what he did, and he stopped yelling at Caleb. He assumed we were both on his side. I was sound asleep at 2 a.m. when I heard a glass crash into bits in the kitchen. I shot up and dashed down the steps. Derek was holding one of the pieces of glass over my mother's head, which made me nauseated. I wouldn't do that if I were you. My voice was extremely dismissive. I've been recording everything you've been doing for the last year, all the bruises, the texts, the shouting, and they've all been sent to my friend's dad, who's a lawyer. He paused in his tracks. My mother looked at me with a mixture of admiration and despair. I just have low blood sugar, he mumbled. The fear of being outed struck him like a stone. Derek left that night with 2 luggage and a vow that this wasn't the end. But it was. The restraining order was filed within 48 hours. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Derek moved out on the same day as the screenshot rule terminated. And after only 6 months of quiet, we received a knock on the door. It wasn't Derek. It was CPS. My younger brother Caleb had reported my mother to his guidance counselor, Derek. Derek had been secretly communicating with my brother the entire time, poisoning his mind with lies about how Mom was the true abuser, how the screenshots were her way of controlling us, and how he attempted to help us but we refused. The CPS agent stood at our door, holding a hefty dossier and a serious attitude. She introduced herself as Elaine and explained that she needed to speak with each of us separately. My mom's face turned white. Caleb wouldn't even look at us, instead staring at his shoes as if they were the most exciting things in the world. Elaine set up in our living room, bringing out forms and a recording equipment. She explained that there had been severe charges of emotional abuse and neglect. My stomach sank. Derek did this, and I knew it right away. Caleb's constant fidgeting with his phone, gazing at it every few seconds, told me all I needed to know. They interviewed Mom first, and Caleb and I waited in the kitchen. I tried to talk to him, but he just shrugged and went into his room. I could hear muffled voices in the living room. My mother's voice was getting higher and more upset with each passing minute. When it was my turn, Elaine inquired about the screenshot rule and whether I felt controlled or monitored. I explained that it was for our own safety, as Mom had always been protective. But I could tell she wasn't really buying it. Caleb's interview lasted the longest, at 2 hours. When he got out, his eyes were crimson and he went back to his room. Elaine told us she needed to undertake a home inspection and would return tomorrow. She also stated that, depending on the gravity of the claims, my mother may need to stay elsewhere temporarily while they investigate. That night I was unable to sleep. I kept thinking about how Caleb had been acting strangely for weeks, always on his phone, secretive, and spending more time in his room. I had figured it was just preteen nonsense, but now everything made sense. I waited till I heard Mom weep in her room. Then I sneaked into Caleb's room. He was awake and texted someone. When he saw me, he hurriedly concealed his phone beneath his pillow. I sat on his bed, asking him what was going on. He didn't say anything that I couldn't understand. I pressed harder and told him I knew Derek was involved. His face crumbled somewhat, but he refused to speak. I asked to borrow his phone to check the time, making up an excuse that mine was dead. He hesitated, but then handed it over. While pretending to check the time, I swiftly opened his messages. What I saw made my blood boil. Dozens of messages from an unknown number, but I recognized Derek's writing style right once. The texts dated back months. Derek had been instructing Caleb on exactly what to say, what to report, and how to make it credible. He informed Caleb that Mom was dangerous, that she was the true abuser, and that the screenshots were her method of controlling us. He'd turned every protective act she'd ever done into something horrible. I screenshotted as many messages as I could before Caleb took his phone back. He started yelling at me to leave, saying I was just like Mom, constantly snooping. I warned Caleb Derek was influencing him, but he just shoved me out of his room and locked the door. Elaine returned the next morning, this time accompanied by another social worker. They walked through our house, inspecting our rooms, the fridge, and everything. Mom needed to pack a bag. The plan was for her to stay with her sister while Caleb and I remained in the house, checking in on a daily basis. Watching her depart with that small bag was one of the most difficult things I'd ever witnessed. Our Aunt Monica arrived an hour later. She attempted to be normal by cooking us sandwiches and talking about school, but I could see the dread in her eyes. She kept checking her phone, possibly texting Mom updates. Caleb stayed in his room for most of the day, only leaving for meals. That night, I combed through my phone, looking for any proof that could help. I discovered earlier screenshots I'd taken of Derek's abusive texts to me, the ones where he complained about Mom. I had saved them in a hidden folder just in case. I also remembered that I had set up an automated cloud backup months ago, out of fear that Derek might try to remove evidence from my phone. The following day at school was torture. I could not concentrate on anything. During lunch, I was on my way to the library when I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. Caleb sat outdoors with Derek. They were sitting at a picnic table near the parking lot, Derek handing him what appeared to be a gift bag. It was supposed to be impossible. The restraining order should have stopped this. I ducked behind a tree and began recording with my phone. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I did see Derek's enthusiastic motions and his persistent hand on Caleb's shoulder. Caleb was nodding and occasionally smiling. Derek left after about 15 minutes, and Caleb returned to school. I confronted Caleb after school and showed him the video. He became defensive, saying Derek simply wanted to check on him and that he was concerned. I reminded him about the restraining order, which said that Derek was not to be within 500 feet of any of us. Caleb stated I didn't understand, that Derek was the only one who truly cared for him. That's when he revealed the gaming setup. Derek had promised to buy him a new PlayStation and a complete gaming computer if he stayed to their tail. He had been showing Caleb photographs of everything he planned to get him once Mom was gone. I felt horrible because Derek was basically buying my brother's story. I told Aunt Monica everything that night. She was furious and quickly contacted Mom's lawyer. But we needed more evidence than simply my word and a video of them seated together. We needed to demonstrate the pattern, manipulation, coaching, and bribes. The next CPS visit was set on Thursday. Elaine would interview us again, but this time with a child psychologist present. I spent the previous days accumulating every piece of evidence I could discover. I searched through Caleb's room while he was at school and discovered gift cards stashed in his desk drawer, all purchased by Derek. I took pictures of everything. I also realized Caleb owned a second phone. It was an old one, stashed in a shoebox in his closet. This must have been how he communicated with Derek without everyone knowing. Caleb's phone was locked, but I knew his normal passwords. After a few tries, I got in. The messages on this phone were more worse. Derek had been meeting Caleb at school on a regular basis, not just the one time I saw him. He'd been telling Caleb tales about Mom's plans to send him to military school and how she'd always wanted a daughter, not a boy. He played on Caleb's every insecurity. One message thread in particular made me enraged. Derek had convinced Caleb that after Mom was gone, I'd turn on him as well, that I was only pretending to care about him to impress Mom. That's why Caleb has been so aloof from me recently. Derek had cut him off from everyone who genuinely loved him. I stored up everything on that phone to my cloud storage, including every message, photo Derek had sent of the items he'd purchased, and every lie he'd uttered. I also discovered voice recordings in which Derek instructed Caleb on exactly what to say to CPS, making him practice his lines like it was a school play. When Thursday arrived, I was ready. But first I needed to reach Caleb. I cornered him before Elaine arrived, showing him communications in which Derek referred to him as a weapon to be used against Mom. Messages in which Derek described him as easy to influence and not particularly intelligent, making him ideal for this strategy. Caleb's expression shifted while he read. I could feel the hurt coming in, the knowledge that Derek didn't genuinely care about him. However, he was in too deep. He stated it didn't matter because he'd told CPS everything and couldn't take it back now. I assured him that it is never too late to reveal the truth. Elaine arrived with the psychologist, Dr. Rivera. They set up in the living room again. This time, they stated that they intended to interview us jointly first, then separately. Aunt Monica had to wait in the kitchen. As we sat down, I saw Caleb's hands shaking. Elaine began with typical questions about our daily routines and how things had been since Mom left. Caleb gave brief responses, adhering to the script Derek had given him. But when Dr. Rivera inquired about our relationship with Derek, I saw an opening. I took out my phone and told them I had something they should see. Elaine appeared suspicious but nodded. I gave them copies of Derek's communications from months ago, where he called Mom nasty names and attempted to turn me against her. Then I showed them the footage of him seeing Caleb at school, which violated the restraining order. Caleb tried to interject, saying I was making things up, but I continued. I informed them about the second phone, the coaching, and the bribery. I played one of Derek's voice messages, in which he essentially told Caleb what words to use when talking to CPS. Elaine's demeanor shifted from doubtful to concerned. Then I dropped the greatest bombshell. I told them to ask Caleb what Derek had indicated would happen if he didn't cooperate. Caleb turned pale. He began stammering that it wasn't true, and Derek had never threatened anything. But Dr. Rivera gently pressed him, employing a psychological method that made Caleb feel safe. Finally, Caleb broke. He began wailing, sobbing like I hadn't seen since he was a child. He admitted Derek had told him Mom would go to jail if he didn't cooperate, that we'd be divided and sent in different foster homes, and that it was entirely Caleb's fault for not saving us from her. Derek's threats became more complex with time, with him detailing in detail how terrible foster care would be. Elaine abruptly halted the interview to make some calls. Dr. Rivera stayed with us, telling Caleb in a calm voice that none of this was his fault, that those who exploit children are to blame, not the children who believe them. Caleb kept crying and apologizing. Within an hour, everything had changed. The CPS probe shifted totally. Derek was now being investigated for witness tampering, child manipulation, and violation of a restraining order. They phoned Mom's lawyer, who arrived shortly with a bundle of documents detailing Derek's past. Mom was allowed to return home that night. Caleb raced up to her as she walked in the door, sobbing apologies into her shoulder. She simply embraced him, tears flowing down her cheeks, telling him it wasn't his fault. I joined the hug, and we stood in our doorway, finally together again. But Derek was not done. The next day, he arrived at our school, alleging a family emergency. He informed the receptionist that he needed to pick Caleb up for a medical visit. Luckily, I had already considered this option. That morning, I went to the principal with Aunt Monica to explain the problem. We'd given Derek copies of the restraining order and made sure everyone on staff knew he wasn't permitted around Caleb. Security stopped him in the office. He tried to argue, claiming he had shared custody rights from his marriage to Mom. He created a scene by ranting about his rights as a father figure. However, the school resource officer was already on his way. I observed from my classroom window as they led Derek off campus. That afternoon, Jasmine, Mom's lawyer, arrived at the house. She emphasized that Derek's custody claim was completely absurd. He had no biological or legal claim to us, thus the divorce was concluded without custody agreements. She had already filed additional charges for his alleged violation of the restraining order at school. Caleb had to prepare a statement summarizing all that had occurred. I sat with him while he typed, pausing every few minutes when he began crying again. He described how Derek had initially contacted him via a gaming site, claiming to be just checking in. The topic gradually changed to complaints about Mom, and finally to downright lies. He wrote about gifts, promises, and threats. Derek had demanded Caleb erase certain texts, but Caleb had forgotten about some of them. He was terrified that our family would be ruined if he didn't do what Derek told him. He felt horrible for believing the falsehoods about Mom. The final CPS hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. In the interim, we installed security cameras and replaced all of our locks. Mom took time off from work to stay home with us. We began family therapy, all three of us sitting in a circle and discussing everything that had occurred. The therapist explained how predators like Derek functioned, how they found and exploited vulnerabilities, how they isolated their victims and made them feel powerless. Caleb realized that what occurred to him was abuse, despite the fact that Derek never physically assaulted him. As the hearing day neared, we prepared ourselves. Jasmine guided us through what to expect and how to answer questions simply and honestly. She stated the evidence was overwhelming in our favor, but we needed to be prepared for whatever Derek would try. We were all unable to sleep the night before our hearing. We ended up in the living room, watching old movies and eating popcorn as we used to before Derek. Mom fell asleep on the couch, arms around both of us. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe. The hearing itself was less spectacular than I had anticipated. Elaine delivered her report, outlining Derek's systematic manipulation of Caleb. Dr. Rivera spoke about the psychological impact of Derek's actions. Jasmine presented the evidence we had obtained, including the messages, recordings, and proof of bribes and threats. Derek's counsel attempted to explain that he was simply a concerned stepfather seeking to safeguard the children. But when they played the recording of him directing Caleb on what falsehoods to tell CPS, his defense crumbled. The judge looked outraged as she listened to Derek explain how to make the abuse allegations appear credible. In the end, the decision was quick and clear. Mom was cleared of all claims. The judge praised her for the preventive precautions she had taken, noting that the screenshot rule, while unique, had revealed critical proof of Derek's habit of abuse. The CPS case was closed once it was determined that Mom had not abused or neglected anyone. But it did not end there. Derek was recommended by the judge to face criminal charges for witness tampering, child manipulation, and breaking a protective order. She imposed a permanent restraining order with explicit language prohibiting communication through third parties or electronic means. Any infraction would lead to immediate arrest. Derek's expression when the verdict was read was something I'll never forget. The mask finally slipped completely, revealing the wrath behind. He couldn't do anything about it. Court officers were prepared to intervene if he made any abrupt movements. His lawyer whispered hurriedly in his ear, perhaps advising him not to make matters worse. Caleb gripped Mom's hand tightly as we exited the courthouse. He'd been so bold in his testimony, plainly saying how Derek had deceived him, how sorry he was for believing the lies, and how he'd never want to see him again. The court applauded his courage in revealing the truth. Derek's criminal case has moved forward. Over the next 3 months, we had to testify again, but this time we were prepared. Derek was subsequently convicted on several crimes. In sentence, the judge stated that using a child as a weapon in a domestic abuse situation was particularly wicked, with psychological consequences that may last a lifetime. Derek received a 5-year prison sentence and was required to register as a child abuser upon his release. We did not celebrate on the day he was sentenced. We went home and ate a pleasant dinner together. Caleb had written a victim impact statement, which the prosecutor read in court. The criminal trial was scheduled for 3 months out. Jasmine warned us to expect Derek to try anything before then. She was correct. 2 weeks later, as I was coming home from school, a car came up alongside me. The window rolled down, and a woman I had never seen before leaned out. She said that she was Derek's sister and that he only wanted to apologize. that he was sorry about everything and had sent me a letter. I kept walking and took out my phone to record. She followed me for 2 blocks and became more aggressive. She told me I was being a brat, that family helps family, and that I owed it to Derek to listen. I called Mom and placed her on speakerphone. The woman heard Mom's words and drove away quickly. We obtained her license plate and reported it immediately. Derek had been calling his family from jail, telling a narrative about being unfairly accused. His sister drove 3 hours to find me. Jasmine convinced the judge to broaden the restraining order to include any contact with family members. Police warned the sister about harassment. Caleb was improving in treatment, but still struggled with trust. He'd loaded 3 separate authentication applications on his phone, terrified that anyone may read his texts. He had also become quite protective of his privacy, which we respected. The therapist claimed that was a typical reaction to having his trust so severely broken. Caleb came home from school one day, quite sad. Some youngster had learned about the trial and was circulating tales, claiming Caleb had tried to get his mother arrested and labeling him a snitch. The next day, Mom went to the school and quickly shut it down. The student was suspended for bullying, and Caleb's teachers began to pay greater attention to the situation. We needed to prepare for the trial testimony. The prosecutor, a woman named Vanessa, was excellent with Caleb. She described everything that would happen, including where everyone would sit and what types of questions they may expect. She stated Derek's lawyer might try to make Caleb feel awful, but if he told the truth, everything would be fine. I had to testify about finding the texts and taping Derek at school. Vanessa advised me to keep calm and simply state the facts. She said Derek's lawyer might try to portray me as a manipulative adolescent who turned her brother against his stepfather, but the proof would speak for itself. Mom was the most worried about her testimony. Having to relive everything in front of Derek made her physically ill. She would have panic attacks just thinking about it. Her therapist suggested anxiety medication to assist her deal with the situation. Jasmine pledged to be present in the courtroom to provide assistance. Derek's lawyer approached Jasmine about a plea offer a week before the trial. He would plead guilty to breaking the restraining order if the child manipulation allegations were dropped. Jasmine chuckled and replied, "No way. We had him dead to rights and wouldn't back down." Derek's lawyer attempted to claim that incarceration would damage his life. Jasmine said he should have considered that before targeting a youngster. We spent the night before trial at a hotel near the courtroom. Nobody wanted to risk being late due to traffic. We ordered room service and watched comedy shows to divert ourselves. Caleb fell asleep on the bed between me and Mom, holding both of our hands as he had done when he was younger. The courthouse looked daunting, with massive marble floors and serious-looking individuals around. We had to pass through metal detectors and security was strict. Vanessa met us in a conference room to discuss last-minute details. Derek, she claimed, had been brought from jail and was already in court with his counsel. Walking into the courtroom and seeing Derek for the first time in months seemed unreal. He had lost weight and his hair was shorter. He attempted to establish eye contact with Caleb, but the bailiff directed him to face forward. His lawyer appeared exhausted, as if he realized this was a lost case but had to try anyhow. The prosecutor's opening statement detailed Derek's months-long systematic grooming of Caleb, how he used presents and threats to turn a youngster against his mother, and how he repeatedly violated a restraining order to continue his manipulation. She described it as a premeditated campaign of psychological torture. Derek's counsel attempted to portray him as a caring stepfather who went too far, claiming that he really believed Mom was violent and was trying to protect Caleb, that the presents were typical step-parent behavior, and that the meetings were misunderstandings. Some jurors rolled their eyes because it was so clear BS. Mom testified first. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. She discussed the abuse they experienced during their marriage, exhibiting images of bruises. She discussed the screenshot rule and how it had protected us, as well as the anguish of being removed from her children after Caleb had reported her to CPS. Derek's lawyer attempted to twist things, but Mom stood fast. When it was Caleb's turn, I could tell he was terrified, but he did fantastic. He detailed how Derek contacted him and how the manipulation had progressed. He read from his statement regarding Derek's threats, including being warned Mom would go to jail and we'd be separated forever. His voice broke several times, but he persevered. The prosecutor revealed audio recordings of Derek tutoring Caleb. The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for Derek's voice instructing an 11-year-old on how to lie to CPS. The jury's faces changed as they listened. One woman appeared to want to jump over the barrier and strangle Derek herself. I testified that I found the proof and documented everything. Derek's lawyer attempted to portray me as a devious girl who manipulated her younger brother, but when Vanessa produced all of the screenshots and recordings on redirect, his case fell apart. The evidence was too overwhelming to refute. The worst part was when they played a prison phone call. Derek had no idea it was being videotaped and was chatting to a friend about his plan. He actually claimed Caleb was stupid enough to accept anything and that he had that youngster wrapped around his finger. Caleb began crying, and Mom had to carry him out into the hallway. Derek's defense was poor. His lawyer brought character witnesses who hardly knew him and attempted to cast doubt on the validity of the communications, but Vanessa crushed every case. She presented metadata demonstrating when messages were delivered, had specialists validate the voice recordings, and made it apparent that this was intentional, calculated abuse. Derek's testimony was disastrous for him. He tried to play the victim, claiming we'd all turned against him, but when Vanessa cross-examined him, he lost his cool and began raving about how Mom had poisoned us against him, and how he was only trying to save Caleb. He admitted to meeting Caleb at school but said it was justified. His lawyer appeared to want to disappear. The jury debated for less than 2 hours before finding the defendant guilty of all counts, including child endangerment, witness tampering, several violations of a restraining order, and harassment. Derek's face became white as they read the decision. He turned to face us and mouthed something, but the bailiff intervened. Sentencing occurred a month later. Caleb's victim impact statement made everyone cry. He talked of losing faith in adults, having nightmares, feeling bad for abandoning his family, and how Derek took advantage of a child who simply wanted a father figure. The court allowed Caleb to read it himself, which was quite daring. Mom's testimony centered on her fear of losing her children, how Derek had used her love for us against her, and how she'd had to watch her newborn boy be misled by someone who was supposed to protect him. She discussed the continuous therapy fees, security precautions, and the persistent fear that Derek would find another method to harm us. I wrote about watching my family fall apart, having to pretend to support Derek in order to protect everyone, feeling guilty for not catching on to what he was doing to Caleb sooner, and learning that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like stepfathers who bring pizza and play video games. The judge sentenced Derek to 5 years in prison, saying that using a child as a weapon in domestic abuse was abhorrent, and that the psychological harm he had caused was as terrible as physical abuse. She ordered him not to contact any of us for the rest of his life, including through third parties. Any breach would result in an immediate return to prison. Derek wanted to say something as they dragged him away, but his lawyer silenced him. His family was in the gallery, and his mother was in tears. I felt bad for her. Discovering your son is a predator must be horrible. But she had reared him, and somewhere along the way, something had gone horribly wrong. After the sentencing, we headed to Jasmine's office to complete some paperwork. She was establishing a trust for Caleb using money from a victim's compensation fund. It would help him pay for rehabilitation and possibly college in the future. She also assisted Mom in filing for a name change for the entire family. We wanted our mother's maiden name, a clean slate, free of any link to Derek. The following few months were spent healing. We painted the entire house, using bright colors that felt quite different from when Derek lived there. Caleb chose lime green for his room, which was awful but made him happy. We adopted a rescue dog who barked at every male who approached our house, which made us all feel safer. Caleb's coding endeavor evolved into something actual. He entered it in a school competition and took second place. Mom graduated from her paralegal program with honors. Jasmine hired her right away, claiming she needed someone who knew domestic abuse from first-hand experience. Mom's first case involved helping another woman whose ex was attempting to turn her children against her. She came home crying that night, but they were happy tears. My entitled brother and his pregnant wife took over my house, threw out my stuff. My mom took his side. Now I'm the villain for kicking them out. I am a 26-year-old male who has been living in the city with my parents for the past year. Sounds fairly simple, right? But it's not as you think. This was not a case of moving back home because I couldn't afford rent. I truly bought the house. I paid the entire mortgage and cover all of the groceries, bills, and expenses. My parents? They do not pay a penny. To give you some context, my parents, Karenza, 52 female, and Elliot, 55 male, are retired teachers. They had been living in the country for years, but after they quit working, they decided they wanted to go to the city. They were tired of the tranquil life and wanted to be closer to more interesting things, At least that's what they stated. I thought, why not? I'm making a nice living as a software engineer, and the city has better work options. Plus, I figured I'd assist them out because they'd done so much for me growing up, typical family stuff. So we moved into this lovely 3-bedroom house in the city. I'm not talking mansion level, but it's a nice property with 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a large living room for everyone to hang out. Because I'm the one who pays the mortgage, I made sure to claim the main bedroom. It has a walk-in closet and its own bathroom, which is ideal because who wants to share a bathroom with anyone else? No thanks. What about the second bedroom? That is my home office. Because I work from home approximately 80% of the time, I set everything up exactly how I wanted. Dual monitors, a nice chair, the whole thing. I imagined the third bedroom would serve as a guest room for family visits or anything. Simple enough, right? At first, everything seemed fine. My parents were simply thrilled to be in the city, and we all got into a fairly comfortable routine. They did their thing, gardening, watching TV, whatever retirees do, while I worked my job, paid the bills, and cleaned the house. I did not mind paying for everything. I make 6 figures, and they don't have any money other than their pensions. Plus, it's a family. You don't charge family rent, correct? Then came the tipping point, and let me tell you, it happened faster than I could have predicted. My mother casually mentioned something at breakfast one day, as if it were no great issue. She walks over. Your brother Eric and Lucy are thinking about moving to the city. They're not doing so well back in the old town, and Lucy's pregnant, so they could really use the help. At first, I didn't think much about it. Eric, 28 male, and Lucy, 26 female, have always been the type of pair who moved from one horrible situation to the next. They weren't struggling, but they also weren't thriving. Lucy's pregnancy added another layer of complexity to the situation. I was thinking, okay, maybe they'll move to the city and get a small apartment or something. But my mother had other plans. A few days later, she sat me down and said, in a very innocent tone, "We've invited Eric and Lucy to come stay with us. It'll just be for a little while until they get back on their feet." Now here is the point at which I should have seen it coming, but did not. I just nodded along, thinking, okay, whatever. They'll stay for a while and then find their own place. What I didn't realize was that this was only the beginning of the pandemonium. My parents didn't specifically ask if I was okay with their moving in. They simply informed me after they had already welcomed them. I was still absorbing everything when Eric and Lucy arrived at our door a week later, luggage in hand, looking like they were moving in for the long haul. So, here's the deal. They move in, and it is immediately evident that they intend to stay indefinitely. I can already feel the stress building up because I pay for everything. Groceries, utilities, mortgage, you name it, and now I have 2 additional people to feed and care for. Nobody even asked if I was fine with it. They simply moved in as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Don't get me wrong, I adore my brother, he's family after all. But Eric isn't exactly the most responsible person in the world. He's the type of guy who always finds himself in difficult situations and then relies on others to help him out. And Lucy? She's polite enough, but she has an entitled attitude that bothers me, as if since she's pregnant, she immediately gets special attention from everyone around her. But this is when things get really twisted up. Lucy begins making these tiny comments a few days after they move in. The ones that appear harmless, but are actually very unpleasant. She'd remark things such as, "This place is so big, it must be hard for you to clean it all by yourself." Additionally, "I can't wait until the baby's here. We're going to need a lot of space for all the baby stuff." I didn't think much of it at first, but then came the surprise. Eric and Lucy approached me one evening after I had finished a long day of work and asked if we could talk. I was thinking, all right, maybe they're going to apologize for taking up space and eating all the food without offering to help. But, nah. Instead, Lucy casually states, "So we've been thinking it would make more sense for us to take the master bedroom." I simply stared at her. I couldn't believe what I heard. "We need more space," Eric stated, as if it were simple. "The baby's going to need a lot of stuff, and your room has a walk-in closet and a private bathroom. Now keep in mind that I pay the entire mortgage. The house is in my name. I also pay for all food, and I've been supporting the entire home without expecting anything in return. And now they were asking me to give up my own bedroom. I was floored. I couldn't even answer immediately. It felt like the boldness had hit me all at once. Ultimately, I responded, "Why don't you just take the spare room? It's plenty big, and it's already set up for guests." Lucy was not having it. But that room doesn't have a walk-in closet, and the baby's going to need space. I stared at them for a few seconds, attempting to remain cool. I'm not giving up my room, I responded as calmly as I could. You can have the spare room, or you can find somewhere else to stay. Eric was surprised that I wasn't just caving in, but Lucy was visibly offended. And that's when I understood things weren't going to go well. Okay. So after that awful chat in which Eric and Lucy directly requested me to give up my room, I hoped that they'd realize how foolish they sounded and back off. Who in their right mind would ask the person who pays the mortgage, buys groceries, and keeps the lights on to simply give up their space? But of course, this is not what happened. Over the next few days, I began to notice these small details. For starters, Eric and Lucy were immediately quite comfortable, almost too comfortable. They'd thrown their belongings around the living room, kicked off their shoes near the couch, and Lucy was already discussing where she was going to place all the baby gear, as if the house was theirs or something. I wasn't saying anything yet, but I had a feeling that something was about to happen. So one day, I had to spend a few hours at the workplace. Normally, I work from home, but there are instances when I must attend meetings. Anyway, I go home around lunchtime to get something to eat, and the moment I walk in, I see something weird. My stuff, my personal belongings, is in the hallway. My clothing is piled on the floor. My computer monitor is just sitting there, unplugged, as if someone was in the process of relocating it. My heart is already racing because I understand what this signifies, but I needed to see it for myself. I enter my room, and there Lucy is, standing in the middle of it, packing up the last of my belongings. She doesn't even look surprised when I go in. She just looks over at me, like, "Oh hey, I was just finishing up." I could not believe it. "What the hell are you doing?" I exclaim, considerably louder than I meant to. She had the nerve to appear calm and collected, as if this were no great issue. "Your mom said we could start moving our stuff in here. The baby's coming soon, and we need the space," she stated as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I could feel my blood boiling. My mother said what? My mother, who doesn't contribute anything to the mortgage, thought it was acceptable to simply hand up my room to Eric and Lucy without first speaking with me? I wasn't going to let this slip. "No," I replied, entering the room. "You're not moving into my room. I already told you guys to take the guest room." Lucy did not like that. She crossed her arms and gave me this look, as if I was the one acting ridiculous. "The guest room is too small for the baby and there's no closet. We need more space." I was not having it. "I don't care. You're not taking my room. I'm the one paying the mortgage. I'm the one who's been paying for everything in this house. And you and Eric aren't even contributing anything. If you need more space, you're welcome to find your own place." At this point, I was furious, and I could tell Lucy was also upset, but I didn't care. She did not back down, however. "Your mom said it was fine," she said, as if it were the last word. This is where I lost it. I marched back out of the room, grabbed my phone and called my mother, who was not even home at the moment. I didn't even wait for her to say hello after she answered. "Mom, did you tell Eric and Lucy they could move into my room?" There was a long delay on the other end, as if she wasn't sure what to say. She finally said, "Well, I thought it would be the best solution. They need the space, and you already have the office. It's not like you're using the room for much." I couldn't believe what I heard. "Are you serious right now?" I demanded. "I pay the mortgage. I pay for all of the groceries. I pay the bills. And you think it's okay if Eric and Lucy just take over my room?" My mother tried to calm me down, saying it wasn't a big issue and that we were all family, but I was finished listening. "I'm not giving them my room, and if they don't move their stuff out, they're going to need to find another place to stay." Lucy must have heard me, since she stormed out of the room, enraged. "You're seriously going to throw us out with a baby on the way?" That's when Eric entered. He must have heard the disturbance from outside, since he came in looking very angry. "What's going on?" he demanded. So I arranged it for him. "What's going on is your wife thinks she can just take over my room without even asking. And I'm telling you both right now, it's not happening. You can either stay in the guest room or you can leave." Eric was not pleased about this. He became protective, stating they were family and I should be willing to make sacrifices for them. But at this time, I was beyond reason. "Sacrifices? I'm already paying for this entire house. What are you guys contributing, huh? Nothing. And now you think you can just walk in and take over?" The ranting became quite loud at that point, and I believe it was evident that neither side was backing down. My mother tried to call me back, but I ignored her. I was too upset to deal with her justifications. Eric kept going on about how I wasn't being fair, how they had a baby on the way, and how families should stick together during difficult times. But I had had enough. I turned to both of them and said, "You have until the end of the day to move your belongings out of my room. If you don't, I'll do it for you." Lucy went out, slamming the door behind her, and Eric stood there, gazing at me as if I were the evil guy. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me in my own home, especially when I was the one paying for everything. I spent the remainder of the day in my office, attempting to chill off. I didn't want to deal with either of them, and I knew going back out there would only lead to another argument. But deep down, I knew it was only the beginning. They weren't going to take this lying down, and I suspected my mother would get involved again. But I was not going to back down either. Not this time. After Eric and Lucy's fight, I hoped that they'd finally back down. I made it clear. My room was not available, and they could either stay in the guest room or find another place to reside. It seemed quite simple to me. However, not everything went as planned. The following day, I stayed mostly to myself. I wasn't looking for more drama, and I was still seething about how things had turned out. I spent most of my time working in the office, pretending everything was normal. But by the time supper arrived, I could sense the tension in the air. Everyone seemed to be avoiding each other, tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. I did not mind the silence. If Eric and Lucy could finally stay in the guest room without causing any more problems, I believed I could deal with it. But then something happened to send me over the brink. That evening, I entered the kitchen to get some supper. I had bought all the goods, like I always do, but when I opened the fridge, it was nearly empty. I'm talking about food that I bought just 2 days ago. It's gone. I checked the freezer, same result. I knew my parents didn't eat that way, and it wasn't me, definitely. So, who else might it be? Eric and Lucy. They'd probably taken everything without asking. I was already upset, but I attempted to dismiss it, thinking, whatever, I'll just pick up more tomorrow. However, it wasn't only the cuisine. When I went to sit at the table to eat, my mother entered the kitchen without looking me in the eye. She quietly prepared plates for herself, my father, Eric, and Lucy. And then, she did not make one for me. At first I assumed she had forgotten, so I just waited. But after serving everyone, she sat down. I was left standing there like an idiot, watching as everyone began eating. I'm not going to lie. I felt the rage rising again. It felt like they were all punishing me for standing up for myself. I stared at my mother, attempting to maintain my composure. "You didn't make me a plate?" She scarcely glanced up. "You don't want to help the family, and you don't eat with the family," she added casually, as if she were discussing the weather. I couldn't believe what I heard. "Excuse me? I pay for everything here. The groceries, the mortgage. And now I'm being iced out." She did not even respond. My dad just sighed and continued eating as if nothing had happened, which irritated me even more. Eric and Lucy sat there with a smug expression on their faces, as if they had won some sort of power play. Lucy even had the guts to smile at me as I walked past. I could not handle it anymore. I was not about to be treated as an outsider in the house I had paid for. I slammed the fridge door shut and raced out of the kitchen, my thoughts racing. I knew what I needed to do next. I rushed straight to my room, got my laptop, and began searching for eviction notifications. I assumed if they didn't want to respect me, they could find another place to live. It's enough, right? I am not a free hotel service. Within an hour, I had the documentation ready. I printed up 2 sets, one for Eric and Lucy, and one for my parents. It felt strange to kick out my own family, but they had crossed the limit. They had been disrespecting me for weeks, acting as if the house was theirs, and then freezing me out when I refused to give in to their ludicrous demands. I was not going to put up with it anymore. After the notices were printed, I stepped out to the living room where everyone was sitting and pretended nothing was wrong. I didn't say anything. I just slapped the papers down in front of my parents before handing another set to Eric and Lucy. "What's this?" Eric inquired, picking up and studying the papers. "You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave," I remarked as calmly as I could. "If you're not out by tomorrow, I'm calling the police." Eric's face became pallid. He didn't expect this at all. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," I answered. "I'm done with this. You've been freeloading here without contributing a thing, and now you think you can take over my house? Not anymore." Eric stood up and glared at me, but I did not move. I was taller and bigger than him, and I was not going to be scared by his little rage tantrum. "We're family," he said with gritted teeth. "You can't just throw us out." "Yes, I can," I replied, going closer. "I'm the one who pays for this house. Not you, not Lucy, and not Mom and Dad. If you don't want to be respectful, you don't get to stay here." Lucy, of course, began crying, as if that would alter anything. "I'm pregnant, and you're kicking us out? What kind of brother are you?" "I'm the brother who's been paying for everything while you two take advantage of me," I replied in anger. "You have 24 hours. That's more than generous." Eric seemed to want to dispute more, but I could see the awareness dawning. I wasn't kidding. My mom, who had been sitting quietly the entire time, eventually piped up. "You can't do this, honey. They're your brother and sister-in-law. This is family." But I didn't care anymore. "I've already done it," I explained, pointing to the eviction notice in her hands. "You've got 30 days to find somewhere else too. If you're not gone by then, I'll be taking legal action." The room fell silent after that. My father didn't say anything, just sat there staring at the table, as if he didn't know what to do. My mother appeared to be about to cry, but I refused to back down. It wasn't about being kind anymore. This was about sticking up for myself and not allowing others to walk all over me. After a few lengthy minutes, I returned to my room and left them to process everything. I locked the door, sat at my desk, and took a long breath. I had just done something I never imagined I'd have to do: toss out my own family. But you know what? It felt nice. It felt right. I was not going to be taken advantage of again. The house was completely silent for the rest of the night. Nobody came to my door. Nobody tried to argue with me. I believe they all knew I wasn't playing around anymore. If they did not respect me, they did not deserve to dwell here. That night, I got the best sleep I'd had in weeks. Update 1. After I handed out those eviction papers, I expected the tension in the home to either explode or everyone to back down and take me seriously. Either way, I knew there was no turning back. I'd drawn a line in the sand and wasn't about to let anyone step over it again. However, instead of the expected explosion, the house became quiet. To be honest, I think it's too silent. The next morning, I awoke earlier than usual because I couldn't sleep. I guess I was waiting for something to happen. Maybe Eric would knock on my door and insist that I change my mind. Perhaps my parents would start pleading with me to rethink. But none of that occurred. When I eventually entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, it was empty. No one was awake yet. No, Eric. No, Lucy. No parents. For a brief moment, I considered the possibility that they had packed up in the middle of the night and departed without saying anything, but I knew that was wishful thinking. I prepared some coffee, sat down at the table, and waited. I was not in the mood to make small conversation or explain myself again. What I had done was necessary. They'd pushed me too far, and I couldn't continue living that way. They didn't respect me, and they certainly didn't appreciate the fact that I paid for everything. All I wanted was basic decency, and they couldn't even provide that. After a time, my mother entered the kitchen, her face looking as if she had barely slept. She didn't say anything at first. She simply took a cup of coffee and sat across from me. It was the first time we had truly been alone since I handed her the eviction notice. The uneasy pause hovered in the air for what seemed like an eternity before she eventually spoke up. "Honey," she began, her voice quiet and exhausted. "I know things have gotten out of hand." I did not say anything. I just stared at my coffee, waiting for the remainder of what she was about to say. I knew an apology, or some variation of one, was on the way, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and your brother," she explained, her voice shaking slightly. "We were just trying to help them, and I guess I didn't see how unfair it was to you." This caught me by surprise. I didn't expect her to admit it so soon. For a brief moment, I believed she realized I wasn't the villain in this circumstance, but I couldn't shake my unhappiness with the way things had turned out. "You didn't just ignore what I wanted," I remarked, my tone harsher than I intended. "You sided with them every single time, like you just assumed I'd roll over and let them take whatever they wanted." "I know," she answered very quietly. "But we thought, well, you've always been the strong one. Eric's never had it easy." She always used that as an excuse. Eric wasn't very strong. Eric had struggled more. Eric needed more help. It was as if they didn't believe I had any boundaries because I was the one who had my life together. "And you think I've had it easy?" I replied, my rage bubbling just beyond the surface. I'm the one who bought this house. I'm the one who pays the mortgage. I pay for the groceries. I've been carrying all of you, and you think I can just keep doing that forever? She stared down at her coffee and remained silent for a few seconds. I know you've done a lot more than we could have asked for. But Eric, with the baby on the way… I shut her off. This isn't about the baby. This is about respect. And you guys haven't shown me any. She sighed, evidently exhausted by the situation, but I wasn't going to let her get away with a few old excuses. You know, we just thought we were doing the right thing, she ultimately admitted. Eric and Lucy, they don't have much. And whose fault is that? I asked. I didn't ask them to move in. I didn't ask for any of this. They need to figure out their own lives, and you can't keep bailing them out by throwing me under the bus. She nodded, as if she finally understood, or tried to. We'll figure something out, she murmured, her voice softer now. But please, don't push us out. Not like this. I reclined back in my chair, attempting to relax. I didn't want to kick them out. After all, they were my parents. But I couldn't continue to live in a scenario where they didn't respect my boundaries. I had let too much slip, and now it was time to take action. I don't want to push you out, I continued, attempting to seem as composed as I am. But things need to change. I can't keep living like this, being treated like I don't matter in my own house. Either things change or, yeah, you'll have to find somewhere else to live. She didn't argue, only nodded silently. Okay, she replied. We'll figure something out. After that, she exited the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wasn't sure if anything would change, but it appeared that they were finally taking me seriously. Eric and Lucy hadn't revealed their faces yet, and I wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing. In any case, they were on borrowed time. Eric arrived later that afternoon. Of course, he appeared to have been ruminating about what had transpired the previous night. When he stepped into the living room, he didn't even say hello. Instead, he sat across from me, wearing the same angry grimace he always had when he didn't get his way. So this is how it's going to be? He questioned, his tone harsh. You're really going to kick us out? I gave you 24 hours, I remarked without glancing up from my phone. If you're still here tomorrow, I'm calling the police. Eric scoffed and shook his head as if I were the evil guy. We're family. Yeah, and family doesn't take advantage of each other, I replied. You've had weeks to figure this out. I'm not your fallback plan. He didn't have anything to say afterwards, just sat there for a few minutes before getting up and storming off again. Typical Eric. He was usually the sort to flee when things didn't go his way, and this time was no exception. The rest of the day passed quietly, too softly, if I'm being honest. I had no idea what Eric and Lucy were going to do, and I wasn't about to change my mind. I had set them a clear deadline, and they knew I wasn't lying. The following 24 hours were going to determine everything. Update 2. The next morning, after all the chaos, I awoke and lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. I knew this was the day. Eric and Lucy only had 24 hours, and the time was running out. It was weird, though. I wasn't mad anymore. I'd already accepted what had to happen, so all that remained was for me to carry it out. When I got up and went into the kitchen, I realized that the house felt different. Not tense, but silent, as if something huge was about to happen. There was no one in the kitchen, so I decided to prepare myself some breakfast. Eric and Lucy's previous raid on the groceries had left the fridge mostly empty, but I made do with what I had. As I sat there eating, I began to reflect on how quickly the issue had gotten out of hand. I mean, things weren't always so bad. My mom and I were getting along. I was working, paying the mortgage, and buying food, and life was going along as usual. When Eric and Lucy arrived, everything fell apart. It's incredible how quickly things can change when individuals start feeling entitled to things they didn't earn. A few hours later, I heard someone walk down the corridor. It was my father. He strolled in softly, took a cup of coffee, and sat at the table across from me. He didn't say anything at first, just sipped and glanced out the window. Eventually he spoke. Eric and Lucy are leaving today. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure if he was telling me that they had opted to depart on their own, or that he was simply reminding me of the deadline. Regardless, I nodded and continued eating. They don't have anywhere to go, he said quietly. They're going to stay at a motel for a while, until they figure things out. I paused mid-bite and stared at him. Part of me felt horrible, but the larger part of me understood it had to happen. I'd been too polite for too long, and if I didn't stand up now, they'd continue to take advantage. I gave them time, I explained, my voice firm. I didn't want it to come to this, but they left me no choice. He didn't argue or try to guilt-trip me, which was surprising. He simply nodded and continued drinking his coffee. I believe he finally realized that I was not going to back down this time. There was no going back to the way things were before. Around lunchtime, Eric and Lucy began collecting their belongings. I stayed in my room for the majority of it, not wanting to start another quarrel or hear any more passive-aggressive comments. But after a while, I could hear Eric's voice becoming louder from down the corridor, and I knew it was only a matter of time until anything happened. Not long later, Eric knocked on my door. I opened it, and he stood there with the same angry expression he'd had when I handed him the eviction notice. "You're really going to let this happen?" he questioned, his voice stern. "You're just going to kick us out like this?" I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "I gave you 24 hours. I told you what needed to happen." He shook his head, jaw gritted. "We're family, man. You don't do this to your family." I took a deep breath and tried to remain cool. Families do not take advantage of each other. I'm not kicking you out without a reason. You have been freeloading here for weeks without giving anything. I've been paying for everything, even the mortgage and food. Instead of being grateful, you attempted to seize my room and push me out of my own home. I am not going to let that happen. Eric said nothing for a few seconds. I could see he was angry, but he had nothing left to quarrel about. He knew I was correct, even though he didn't want to admit it. "So that's it, huh?" he said. "You're just throwing us out." "I'm giving you the same option I gave you yesterday," I told you. "You can find a way to live somewhere else, or you can stay in the guest room and actually respect me and my space. But if you can't do that, then yeah, you're leaving." Eric scowled at me, then turned and walked away without speaking. I closed the door and exhaled deeply. It was exhausting, but I understood what needed to be done. By mid-afternoon, Eric and Lucy had left. I didn't see them go, and I really didn't want to. I was not looking for an emotional goodbye or anything like that. They collected their belongings, loaded them into their car, and drove away without saying anything to me. The house felt different after they left, quieter, less tense. My parents did not say much to me that day. I assumed they were still absorbing what had transpired. My mother appeared upset, but she said nothing about it. Perhaps she finally realized I wasn't to blame for anything. Eric and Lucy pushed me too far, and this was the outcome. That evening, my mother knocked on my door. She came in, perched on the edge of my bed, and stared at the floor for a bit. I could tell she was looking for the proper words. "They're gone," she replied softly. I nodded without saying anything. "I never thought it would get to this point," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much pressure we were putting on you." I stared at her, feeling a little less frustrated. "It's not that I didn't want to help," I said. "But you guys treated me like I didn't matter. Like my needs and my space weren't important." She exhaled and nodded. "You're right. We should have seen it sooner." We sat silently for a few minutes. I could tell she was upset, but she was starting to see where I was coming from. "I don't want you and Dad to leave," I murmured, breaking the stillness. "But if things don't change, I can't live like this." She nodded again and stood up slowly. "We'll figure it out," she explained. "Things will be different. I promise." As she left the room, I felt an odd combination of relief and tiredness. The matter with Eric and Lucy had been resolved, but there was still work to be done with my parents. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but at least they were willing to listen. For the first time in weeks, I felt able to breathe again. The home was calm, and the tension in the air had dissipated. It wasn't a perfect answer, but at least I had my space back, and more importantly, my respect. My jobless family came screaming at my door, demanded money. My brother forced his way in, trashed my flat. I called police. Now they're in jail. I am a 25-year-old woman who lives with her parents. I have 2 siblings, Frank and Bella. As the oldest, I was the first to start work. For a long time, just my father and I worked to support our family. My mother was either sick or too tired to work. Over time, I've come to recognize that her situation is self-inflicted. She would rather spend the day sitting on the couch, watching TV and feasting, than working. I gave up on convincing her to start working a long time ago. My brother and sister started working soon after finishing school. Unfortunately, they were not able to keep their employment for long. My brother was a robber, and my sister blamed her lack of job on her mental health. The transient financial ease we had when they started working did not last. I ultimately had to work extra shifts at work, knowing I couldn't rely on them. I worked hard to advance in my firm. Now, I make more than most people my age. Many people admire my accomplishments, yet I feel like an imposter. Looking back, I realize I haven't done much for myself. 70% of my wages are spent on housing expenses, leaving me with only 30%. That sum barely covers my necessities. On top of that, there is usually an unexpected bill at the end of the month that I must pay. I work so hard that I rarely get home, and when I do, it is a nightmare. At least I'm compensated for my job, but no one pays me to clean the house. I need to clean, do laundry, wash the dishes, and make sure we have enough groceries. My mother and sister barely contribute. My mother spends the entire day watching television, whilst my sister isolates herself in her room and only leaves to hang out with her friends or get into trouble. I can't ask my father or brother for help because they follow traditional gender roles. This is the type of family I am from. Despite my disagreement with those values, I felt I had no choice because I was living in their house. Every time I tried to speak up, my mother ordered me to find my own space. She understands that I can't afford my own home while also supporting the family. She also believes my heart is too tender to allow children to fend for themselves. None of this is why I am writing this post. It's not even the main reason I'm frustrated. My unhappiness arises from the fact that my parents have once again shown that they value my brothers over me. It was my birthday 2 days ago. My gift? Body wash. Yes, body wash. You might think I'm ungrateful, but Bella had her birthday last month. She hosted a grandiose surprise party that we could not afford. I had to take on more consulting job to help pay for it. This came after my father stated that he had enough money to pay for the party, which I had initially declined. Following the party, he came me with a sob story about miscalculating expenses. He also told me that he had borrowed from dangerous individuals and was afraid they would hurt us. To safeguard my family, I decided to pay for the party. I was quite unhappy since they keep doing this. Whether it's a holiday or a birthday, they always prefer my brother's gifts before mine. This year my brother received a new gaming system as a gift, while my sister received a certificate to our city's most expensive spa. And me? I received body washes. After everything I've done for this family, is body wash all I deserve? I'm not sure why, but this time I felt offended. Every time they did this, I discovered a way to get past it. I convinced myself they didn't mean it, that they loved and valued me. However, I believe it's time to stop telling myself lies. That body wash was the last straw. I exploded after receiving it. I was unable to control myself. I felt a huge knot in my throat and my rage overpowered me. I asked them why I couldn't celebrate like Bella and Frank. All I got was body wash, not even a delicious cake. My father became upset and demanded why I was being so disrespectful when I knew their financial situation. At that point, I started giggling and wondered how he could say that with a straight face. He was the one who went into debt to make sure Bella had a great birthday, but he couldn't afford more than $20 for me. I became tired of being treated differently. At that point, I had to ask if I was adopted. Is this why they treated me like a stranger? I work hard at my job, come home and care for everyone, and all I get is body wash. They must be kidding. At this time, my mother erupted into tears, saying how much she despised my small outbursts. So it's okay for her to have feelings, but displaying mine is insulting to the family? That is exactly how I took her comment. She experiences hundreds of different emotions during the day, and we are expected to tolerate them. But if I become enraged over something valid, I am considered theatrical. Fine. I decided to stop arguing and went to my room. When they called, I claimed to be asleep. I sat there the whole time, just thinking. I was very unhappy. Even though I keep myself occupied all the time, I can't fall asleep. My thoughts revolve around how sad I feel. Most people my age are buying their first car, getting married, or buying a house. I see some of them doing just that at work, despite the fact that they make less than me. I'm envious. Despite being ahead at work, I am far behind in life. I don't have an identity or a purpose in this world. My sole aim is to serve these ungrateful individuals. Now that I think about it, how did I allow them to abuse me like this? They had been taking advantage of me for so long that I had no idea. My feelings on this have become very clear as a result of the incident involving my birthday gift. Now I realize that I don't want things to stay this way forever. Something needs to change. I feel like I'm not doing anything with my life, and I'd like to know what I can do to change that, to find my own purpose. Update 1. I did it. I moved out 2 months after my original post. I can't believe I moved out just 2 months after the birthday incident. My apartment is small and sparsely decorated, but it's mine. Do you want to know what I did immediately after I completed moving? I slept in my bed for hours, with no one calling to address a simple issue. It was a strange sensation. I had no clue lying in bed could be so therapeutic. You're probably wondering how I moved, especially with my strict family. It wasn't easy, but I finished it. First, I followed their advice and started setting boundaries. I paid only the bare minimum for home expenditures and saved the rest. I also worked additional shifts at work and saved money. When my parents asked about the money, I told them that it will be included in my year-end bonus. It was challenging, but after I had enough for the deposit, I told them to go to hell and went into my new apartment. Once I had decided which apartment to rent, I informed my parents that I was going. The chat wasn't nice. They were outraged and asked if living with them was indeed that bad. I told them that it was not about them, but about me. I was getting older and needed to gain some freedom. I would be unable to accomplish it if I continued to live with them. Besides, Mom had always suggested that I should acquire my own place. Of course, my mother was offended by my response and called it snarky. She pretended to want only the best for me, but I scoffed everything she said. I understood I couldn't win the fight, so I apologized and moved on. My family was adamantly opposed to my wish to relocate, but there was nothing they could do. I had already signed my lease and was ready to depart. In protest, none of them helped me pack. I had to ask a couple of co-workers for help. Janet and Lisa, 2 acquaintances from different divisions at work, were the only ones who knew about my situation at home. When I told them I was relocating, they jumped with joy. When I asked for assistance with the move, they were delighted to help. We finished transferring everything a few days ago, and now I'm in my almost empty flat. I don't have much yet, but I am content. I can't wait to begin living independently. Update 2. I've been living in my apartment for over a month. It has been a difficult month, but I am happier than ever, or was until a few hours ago. Let me quickly recap what has happened over the last month. I've been furnishing my flat and even hosted a housewarming party. Also, now that I have my evenings open, I've started going out with friends and meeting new people through them. It's fantastic to have a social life after being without one for so long. Honestly, I believe I am now living for myself. Aside from building a social life, I've been dating someone Lisa introduced me to. In the past, I never went out with anyone since I didn't have time. My family was constantly disturbing my plans with an emergency, but now that I live farther away, they can't do so. You're probably wondering how my relationship with my family has been over the past month. Actually, none of them had contacted me at all during this time. They have been abnormally silent, which has been perplexing at times. I considered messaging them, but then I stopped myself. I feel like I'm generally the one that breaks the ice and apologizes when we argue. I don't want to be that way anymore. I wanted to be treated with the same respect as any other member of the family, therefore I chose not to contact them. For a while I thought our relationship was over. That is, until my mother reached me this afternoon when I was working. I was surprised to see her name on the screen, but I did answer. As soon as I picked up, she inquired, "Where's the check?" At first I was bewildered since I had no idea what check she was talking about. Had she forgotten that I didn't live with them anymore? What were her ideas exactly? She questioned how I expected them to function without my guidance. I informed her that she had 2 healthy, capable children who could help with the bills. They had a month to look for work. What did they do throughout that time? She then asked how I could be so thoughtless of my siblings' plight. So I questioned her. How could I have pity for a criminal and a lazy girl? They harmed their own job prospects. Couldn't they learn from me and persevere? I informed my mother that I was not going to send anything, and that they should make their own preparations. Then I hung up. She called me several more times, but I didn't answer. Later, my father called and attempted to chastise me, but I hung up. I couldn't believe what I'd accomplished. I had never cut someone off while they were speaking before. But, to be honest, the previous month has been really peaceful, and reconnecting with them has reminded me of how turbulent my life used to be. I don't think I want to disturb my peace by bringing them back into my life. I wish they had stayed silent. They should have cut me off and left me alone, because I was never a member of the family. I now realize that they only wanted me for as long as I could provide for them. I was living an unsustainable lifestyle since I was always available to help others. But now that's over. I have reached my limit. It's time for me to focus on myself. I should have done this long ago. They've tried to make me feel awful, but it's not working. I believe it's because I've become immune to it. Update 3. I honestly don't know what's happening with my family. I cannot believe I am related to such odd people. I knew they were willing to go to lengths to attain their objectives, but this is too much. I will not be patient with them after this. They are about to see a side of me they did not know existed. It had been 2 days since my relatives started nagging me for money. I have constantly told them that I will not give them anything. They need to design their own strategy. How can they expect me to help them if they can't pay their bills? I already have my own expenditures. It is completely reckless and irrational. I've been ignoring them for the past 24 hours, focusing on buying more furniture for my flat. It's finally starting to look like a house, and I'm very proud of myself. I can't believe I now have goods of my own. Unfortunately, I can't really appreciate their success because they've been so annoying. I've ignored them the whole time, which is probably why they decided to come to my house. Yes, they visited my flat last night while I was hosting a small gathering. Here's what occurred. Yesterday was a Friday night and several of my friends wanted to go out, but I was too tired. Lisa and Janet agreed, so we scheduled a book and wine night at my apartment. 2 more girls joined us, and we were having a great time until there was a disturbance outside the door. I live in a quiet apartment complex, so this was concerning. We tried to ignore it, but it grew louder and eventually reached my door. When I opened it, my sister, father, and brother were arguing with the building's manager. They demanded to be allowed into my apartment because they were family. I couldn't believe what I saw. I told the manager I knew them, but they weren't welcome. My father appeared hurt and said he only wanted to talk. I asked him to check the time, which was 10 p.m. I told them that if they wanted to see me, they could have called ahead. Also, how did they learn where I lived? That's when my sister stepped in, claiming she heard from a friend who saw me at the complex. Then she looked around and realized I was living large. She asked why she couldn't live with me. I looked at her as if she were insane. Why would I want to live with someone who was so unproductive? I'd need to feed her and clean up after her. I haven't forgotten the dynamics of the past few years. I told them to leave because they were not welcome, especially at that hour. My father refused, saying they wouldn't leave until I spoke with them. I told him I wasn't interested in talking, especially since I had guests. Then my brother started yelling at the top of his lungs, addressing my friends and calling me a useless sister. He then forced his way into my flat and started verbally assaulting me. Between him, my sister, and my father, I felt completely overwhelmed. Meanwhile, my friends sat stunned, watching this horrific show. Things only got worse. My father and brother began rifling through my belongings and turning them upside down. I cried because I saw them treat my possessions so disrespectfully. I implored them to stop, but they did not listen. They said I was to blame and demanded a check. That is, until security arrived. It turned out that Janet had gone to contact security as soon as my father and brother began disrupting the calm. When security arrived, my father and brother refused to go and attempted to resist. That was a major mistake, since the uproar became so loud that they had to call the cops. My father and brother are currently in jail for trespassing in my flat and disrupting the peace. They will not be released until Monday, and I have already filed charges. I am bringing them to court over this. They've gone too far, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. This marks the end. They've gone too far, and I'm not going to let them drag me farther into their mess. Update 4. I wanted to post an update sooner because it has been 4 months, but I chose to wait until everything was resolved. Now that the trial has ended, I can finally tell you everything. I think many of you will be relieved to know that my family received what they deserved. Starting with my brother. The judge was harsh on him because he had previously shoplifted and is a repeat offender. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Unfortunately, this will remain on his record, making it even more difficult for him to establish a future for himself. But honestly, given the way he's been spending his life, he had little chance. I'm hoping that his time in jail will straighten him out and help him set priorities. I've seen folks considerably younger than him who have significantly more structured lives. My father had to pay a fee to the court and is currently on probation. If he even receives a traffic ticket, he's done. He needs to be really cautious for a time, otherwise he'll wind up in jail. Both the judge and the city take these transgressions very seriously, which is why they have met with severe punishments. Now, about my mother. Years of gluttony and idleness have now caught up with her. She is at high risk of heart disease due to her poor lifestyle. Because of how quickly her health is deteriorating, doctors estimate she has less than 2 years if she does not make radical adjustments. Knowing her, she probably doesn't care, because she believes she will live forever. I tried for years to convince her to eat healthier. but she never listened. So I gave up. If her high cholesterol does not kill her, my sister most likely will. Speaking of my sister, she's been the talk of the town lately, and not for the right reasons. Since money has been tight and no one is funding her lifestyle anymore, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She somehow became acquainted with the wrong crowd, girls who were rumored to be selling certain items on the street corner. It is both forbidden and highly hazardous. I heard about a week ago that she had been imprisoned for doing something suspicious. I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up in a physically risky scenario as a result of her chosen route. People have urged me to speak with her, but she chose this life. Honestly, she probably thinks I'm stupid for working an honest job. No insult to anyone in that field, but I've observed what some of these girls go through. There is no happy ending in store for her, only substance usage, extra jail term, and risky situations. My mother has fallen numerous times as a result of the stress that Bella has caused, but Bella still lives with our parents. So they are encouraging her actions by allowing her to be there. Even if she is producing money, she is obviously not spending it correctly or meeting her responsibilities. You are obviously wondering how I know all this. I found out from a reputable source. My parents are now getting food stamps, and my father's working hours have been lowered. He spends much of his time at home with my mother and Bella. I can only imagine how hungry everyone must be in that house right now. But it isn't only for them. In addition, they must reimburse me for the harm they caused to my apartment. I was able to recover the stuff they damaged, but they still have to pay the judge's ruling. I feel sad for them, but not enough to intervene and assist. It's what it is. They made their judgments, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Update 5. I have an update on several recent occurrences, and the truth is that my family is getting further into the problems that, as I repeatedly say, they created for themselves. They are the ones who attempt to dig themselves out of a hole by digging deeper. I'm not sure if there is a path back for them, but I know it is not my responsibility to get them out of the holes they've dug themselves. And they keep going deeper. To begin with, my father, who was supposed to pay for the damage he and my brother caused in my apartment, did not do so. Many of the comments I received in my previous update predicted this outcome, and they were right. The worst part is that this time, he didn't even attempt. He made no effort to indicate his readiness to follow the judge's instructions. However, the judge was accurate in warning that any failure would result in his return to prison. A sneeze may send him in jail, which is exactly what happened. It wasn't a true sneeze, but his failure to pay the required amount resulted in a trip to jail. I found out a few days ago that he is currently serving time there. The absurdity of the situation is that my father was, theoretically, the only one working in that house. I don't know how my mother will cope without him now that he's in prison. When I last spoke with someone close to the family, they stated there was almost no food in the home. Given my mother's health difficulties, this is really concerning. But, to be honest, all I feel is a cold distance from the entire situation. For years I was the one who kept that house afloat, but they emotionally and financially abused me. They are now facing the consequences of their own folly. Furthermore, my mother is alone in the house, not only because my father is in jail, but also because my brother and sister are now incarcerated. My brother had already been in jail for a while, as you may recall, but my sister has now joined him. Yes, her business venture ended as planned. She was arrested. Everyone saw it coming, except her. Her condition deteriorated when she began using in addition to selling, making her even more susceptible and without judgment. An undercover officer caught her in the act, putting a halt to her attempts to live an unsustainable lifestyle. She's currently awaiting trial, but I doubt she'll come away unhurt. The worst part is that she can't afford professional representation, so she's defended by a public defender. I do not mean to be harsh, but I don't see much of a chance for her. As for my mother, I'm not sure what will happen to her life now. She is staying in a house that once housed 5 people but is now absolutely empty. My father is in prison, my sister is facing a trial, and my brother has already served time. The house is empty, and the saddest part is that she has no one to care for her. For years, she relied solely on others to bring her money and food. She can barely leave the house anymore due to her health problems. I'm not sure how she will live. I know they get food stamps, but that isn't enough to live on. In summary, my family has completely collapsed. All I have left is my tranquility, and while this may sound harsh, I do not regret removing myself. Update 6. I feel terrible about having to deliver bad news, but it's no longer my fault, it's my family's. Despite the fact that everything is happening in slow motion, I can't help but be grateful that I am not intimately involved in this calamity. To begin, I've finally retrieved my money. It was not an easy process, and as expected, my father did not have enough money to pay me. The only reason Dad did it was because my mother had to take out a loan to get him out of jail. The fact that my father was in jail for contempt made things considerably more difficult, but she eventually collected the money after much effort. Of course, it was not her idea, but rather my mother's desperate attempt to get my father out of jail. My father's release from jail is arguably the only positive side of this situation. During this time, my mother was staying with a relative while working to fix my father's legal troubles. She left the house for an extended period of time, and as one would expect, it was abandoned. Now, the neighborhood we lived in was never ideal, especially for leaving a property alone. Apparently, it has been vandalized and completely looted. The most concerning aspect is that, according to what I've been told, there are people living there now, people who, from what I understand, may have previously been clients of my sister. The fact that people are squatting in the house is simply the start of the problem. Still, even if my parents are able to remove them, which I doubt will be easy, I'm not sure what remains as a house. It upsets me to think about the status of the place I once called home, especially given I spent so much time and effort maintaining it while I was still living there. However, at the end of the day, it is no longer my home. It is not in my name, and it is not my obligation to fix it. My parents will have to handle this on their own. My siblings continue to fulfill their sentences. There have been very few updates on that front. What amazes me the most about this is how swiftly things deteriorated after my departure. It's as if my departure was the final nail in the coffin of a situation that was already deteriorating from within. Thank you for reading. If you have not already subscribed, please do so and click the notification bell to stay up to date on the latest shocking real-life tales. My sister applauded when Dad slapped me at a party of 30. That night, I made a call that destroyed them all. Now they're begging. My name is Claire. I'm 32, and I've learned the hard way that blood does not always imply loyalty. However, sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to face the consequences of their own acts. It all started with what was supposed to be a celebration. My younger sister, Maris, had recently purchased her first home with her husband, Henry, and they were hosting a housewarming celebration. Maris, 29, had always been the golden child, marrying young, having 2 children by the age of 25, and convincing our parents that she could do no wrong despite a series of terrible financial mistakes. I, on the other hand, was the family's disappointment. Never mind that I had a great profession as a financial consultant, owned my own home, and worked tirelessly to purchase a lovely holiday property in the mountains. My parents, Gerald and Sophia, considered my life useless because I did not have children. They didn't care if I was completely content with my dog Finn, or that I was independent. When I arrived, the celebration was already in full gear, with a great bottle of wine and a gift card to Maris's new place. There were about 30 individuals there, including family, friends, and neighbors. Maris was delighted to see me, giving me a big embrace and thanking me for coming. For a minute, I believed things were improving between us. I should have known better. About an hour into the celebration, Maris tapped her wine glass to draw everyone's attention. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she said, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness I'd grown to recognize over the years. "Henry and I are so grateful for all the support as we start this new chapter." Then her tone changed. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss while we're all here together." She stared directly at me, and my stomach dropped. "Claire, could you come over here for a minute?" The crowd dispersed as I made my way to where Maris was standing. My parents flanked her on either side, and the expressions on their faces told me this wasn't going to end well. The discussions around us dwindled as more people turned to watch. "Claire," Maris said, her voice now audible to everyone. "You know how tight money has been for Henry and me, especially with the kids and the new mortgage." I nodded nervously, unsure where this was going but experiencing a sinking sensation. "Well, we've been talking as a family," she said as she gazed at our parents. "And we think it would be really generous of you to let us use your vacation cabin. You know, since you barely use it. And we could really make some memories there with the kids." The way she phrased it sounded like a done deal, as if I had already agreed. But I hadn't. In fact, this was the first time I'd heard about it. "Maris, I actually," Mama interjected, walking forward with that smile that never left her eyes. "We think you should just give it to Maris and Henry. It would be the family thing to do." The room had become utterly silent. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. My cheeks were flushed with embarrassment and rage. You want me to give away my vacation home? It's not like you're using it for its intended purpose, Dad said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd used to silence my opinions all his life. Vacation homes are for families. You just go up there alone with that dog of yours. That dog has a name, I remarked with a high voice. And yes, I go there to relax and recharge. It's my property that I worked hard to afford. Maris laughed, but it wasn't pleasant. Come on, Claire. Don't be selfish. Think about my kids, your niece and nephew. They deserve to have those experiences. They can have experiences at the dozens of other vacation rentals available, I said, attempting to maintain my composure despite the rage swelling inside me. I'm not giving away my property. Mom's disguise slipped entirely. You don't even have kids, she exclaimed, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. What do you need a family vacation home for? Just keep walking with your dog and stop being so damn selfish. The cruelty in her voice astounded me. These were the folks who were meant to love and support me, and here they were, publicly humiliating me for not having children, which wasn't exactly my choice. I had been struggling with infertility for years, which they were aware of, yet seemed unconcerned about. Dad took a step forward, his face flushed with rage. Your sister has kids, real responsibilities. You're just a barren waste, taking up space and resources that could benefit actual family members. The term desolate struck me as a bodily blow. I'd heard Dad make terrible words before, but never this publicly or aggressively. The crowd shuffled uncomfortably, but no one spoke anything. Nobody defended me. Maris was virtually beaming with malicious joy. About time the family disappointment paid up, she cackled. Maybe this will finally make you useful for something. I stood there, shaking with wrath and shame, as my own family tore me apart in front of a crowded gathering. Some looked away sheepishly, while others watched with sick interest. But no one came forward to defend me. I said no, I managed to say through tight teeth. It's my property, and I'm not giving it away. That was when Dad completely lost it. His hand shot up quickly, connecting with my cheek in a vicious backhand that knocked me backward. The sound of the smack reverberated across the suddenly silent room. And then, to my complete horror, people began clapping. Not everyone. Some looked astonished and uncomfortable, but there were enough individuals to fill the room with applause. Maris was beaming, like if she had just won an award. Mom nodded in approval. Dad fixed his shirt as if he'd just finished something essential. I stood there, fingers pressed against my burning cheek, staring at the individuals who were supposed to be my family. The treachery went deeper than any physical agony ever could. Fine, I replied calmly, my voice dead calm. I'll remember this. I went out without saying anything, leaving behind the gift I had brought and any illusions I had about my family's unconditional devotion. The drive home was a haze. Finn greeted me at the door with his usual excitement, and I buried my face in his fur, finally allowing the tears to fall. My cheek was swollen, my heart was torn, and I felt more alone than I ever had before. But when the initial shock faded, something else began to take its place. Cold, calculated anger. I had always been the responsible member of the family. While Maris made one bad financial decision after another, I had been quietly helping out. I co-signed her first auto loan when her credit was bad. I had lent her money for emergencies more times than I could remember. I'd even contributed to a down payment on the house we just celebrated, though she'd sworn me to secrecy about it. More importantly, I had been managing our parents' funds for the last 5 years. Dad had asked me to take over when Mom began to exhibit early signs of memory loss, and he was straining to keep track of things. I had sorted their finances, set up their retirement accounts, handled their taxes, and ensured that all of their payments were paid automatically. Mom's condition had deteriorated over the years, but she still had many good days, and she understood and appreciated my assistance with their finances. They absolutely trusted me with their financial lives. Maris had no idea I was involved. But here's the thing. As a financial advisor, you learn that money equals power. And power may be withdrawn just as easily as it is granted. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and began making calls. The first call went to the bank that held Maris's mortgage, which I helped her qualify for by co-signing and paying a portion of the down payment. I told the loan officer that, due to recent family circumstances involving financial abuse and threats, I was concerned about my continued duty as a co-signer and needed to know my options. I understand your concerns, Miss Thompson. the officer responded. While you can't simply remove yourself as a cosigner, you can formally request that we re-evaluate the loan based on changed circumstances. Given what you're describing, we would need to reassess whether the primary borrowers can qualify for the loan independently. And what happens if they can't re-qualify? I was thinking about it. We would work with them on modification options, but if no suitable arrangement can be reached, the loan could potentially be called in. Perfect. The second call was to resign my power of attorney over my parents' finances. I diligently chronicled everything over the years, and what I learned was really unsettling. Dad had been surreptitiously sending money to Maris for years, money that was supposed to be part of Mom's care fund for her deteriorating memory. The loans he gave Maris were never repaid, totaling more than $30,000. Most alarming, he was opening credit accounts in Mom's name without her knowledge or consent. Given her worsening cognitive state, I scrupulously documented everything: screenshots, bank statements, email chains, that I legally got while serving as their official financial agent before resigning. The third call went to Adult Protective Services. I'd like to report suspected financial elder abuse, I informed the intake staff. I have documentation of someone systematically taking money from an elderly woman with memory issues, including using her identity to open credit accounts. I provided them with everything: bank statements indicating unlawful transfers, evidence of the credit applications Dad had filled out with Mom's details, and evidence that Mom's cognitive impairment made her susceptible to this type of manipulation. This is very serious, the worker informed me. We'll need to start an investigation immediately. In the meantime, we'll need to freeze the accounts in question to prevent further exploitation. The fourth call went to Maris's employment. Maris worked as a bookkeeper for a small family firm, and I happened to know that her supervisor, Ms. Benton, was quite concerned about her staff financial integrity. A short check of public records revealed that Maris had multiple recent judgments against her for outstanding debts, which had not been reported during her employment. I did not make any charges. I simply asked Ms. Benton whether she was aware that Maris had hidden financial judgments that could influence her bonding insurance, which was required for her role managing the company's finances. The fifth call went to the IRS. Dad's loans to Maris, which were never repaid and totaled more than $30,000, are technically deemed taxable income because forgiven loans exceed a particular threshold. And if Maris had accepted these funds without declaring them, it would be tax evasion. I gave the IRS complete evidence of every transfer, loan, and gift that exceeded the annual limit, all of which I received legally through my duty as Mom and Dad's financial agent. But I wasn't finished yet. The sixth call went to Child Protective Services. Now, let me be clear. I would never make fraudulent claims about child welfare. But I didn't have to. Maris's social media was a goldmine of concerning information that she'd posted herself, including photos of her children in situations that CPS would undoubtedly want to investigate, posts about leaving the kids alone while she went out, and comments about using medications to help the kids sleep so she could have adult time. All information is publicly available. All screenshots are documented. All of this is actually disturbing for children's welfare. I just gathered everything and sent it along with a request for a wellness check. Henry's boss was the last person I called. Henry worked in construction, and his employer had very strong standards about domestic abuse, including insurance liability and job site safety. The images I'd taken of my damaged face, together with witness testimony from some of the more decent people at the party who were shocked by Dad's actions, provided a clear picture of a family dealing with major violence issues. I never accused Henry of anything. I merely provided facts on the family atmosphere and let the firm decide whether it fit their employment standards. Then I sat back, waiting. It did not take long. 3 days later, Maris called me and screamed. "What did you do?" She screamed into her phone. "The bank is calling our loan. They want the full balance in 30 days or they're starting foreclosure." I removed myself as a cosigner, I explained quietly. "It's my legal right." "You can't do this. We'll lose the house." "You should have thought about that before you decided to publicly humiliate me and demand my property." "Claire, please." Her voice changed to a phony tenderness. "I'm sorry about the party. Things got heated. But you can't punish my kids for—" "Your kids? The ones you were so concerned about having vacation memories with? Maybe they should ask their grandfather where all their grandmother's medical money went." The line became quiet. "What are you talking about?" Maris inquired, but her tone shifted. She knew. "Adult Protective Services is very interested in Dad's financial activities," I remarked with a smile. Apparently, stealing from a dementia patient is a serious crime. Who knew? The second domino dropped the following day, when Dad called. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, trying to appear authoritative, but with a palpable sense of panic. "There are people asking questions about Mom's accounts." "I'm sure there are," I said. I turned over all the financial records to the appropriate authorities. "You had no right." "I had every right. You gave me power of attorney, remember? That means I'm legally obligated to protect Mom's interests. Funny how that works." "Those were family loans." "Those were thefts from a vulnerable adult," I explained. "The police seemed very interested in the fact that you opened credit cards in Mom's name without her knowledge." The hush lasted for quite some time. "What do you want?" he finally inquired. "I want you to face the consequences of your actions," I told you. "Just like you made me do at Maris's party." The third domino provided the most satisfaction. Maris lost her position after Ms. Benton found not only the concealed financial judgments, but also some innovative bookkeeping Maris had been using to cover her own money problems. Borrowing from petty cash with the aim to repay it later is still considered stealing, even if you intend to replace it. The fourth domino fell when the IRS audit discovered that Maris had not disclosed over $40,000 in forgiven loans and gifts over the previous 3 years. The penalties and overdue taxes were considerable, and wage garnishment occurred immediately. The fifth domino fell when CPS conducted a wellness check and discovered conditions troubling enough to warrant parenting classes and regular check-ins. Nothing that put the kids in immediate danger, but enough to make Maris and Henry extremely stressed. Henry lost his job because his company determined that his involvement in domestic violence incidents posed an unacceptable level of liability risk. However, the turmoil had only just begun. About 2 weeks after Henry lost his job, I received a call from my cousin Nina, Maris's dearest friend since childhood. Nina had attended the celebration but had not participated in the applause. In truth, she had been horrified the whole time. "Claire, I need to tell you something," Nina began, her voice quivering. "I should have said this weeks ago, but I was scared. What happened at Maris's party? It wasn't spontaneous." My blood became chilly. "What do you mean?" "They planned it," she explained. "I overheard Maris, your mom and your dad talking before the celebration started, and Maris mentioned that she had been working on getting your cabin for months. She said you were too self-centered to give it up willingly, so they had to exert familial pressure in front of witnesses. You couldn't back down." The treachery wound deeper than I had anticipated. They intended to ambush me. Maris clearly stated that if they did it publicly, I would be too embarrassed to decline. "She laughed about it, Claire," Nina explained. "She said something about how you always crumble under public pressure and that you'd probably just hand over the keys to avoid more confrontation." I felt nauseous. The entire event had been a premeditated attack intended to take advantage of my perceived weakness. They had brought 30 people to watch what they expected to be my humiliation and capitulation. "There's more," Nina added. "After you left, Maris boasted about how she'd been warming you up for months with sob stories about money problems. She claimed she had been documenting every time you supported her financially so she could use it as proof that you always cave when family members need assistance." "Evidence for what?" "She intended to take you to court if public shame did not succeed. She had this belief that because you had been financially supporting her for years, you owed it to your family to continue. She thought she could persuade a judge to order you to sign over the cabin as part of a family support agreement." The audacity was amazing. Maris had been preparing a court case to seize my possessions, using my generosity as leverage. "Why are you telling me this now?" I requested an explanation. Nina was silent for a moment. "Because Maris phoned me yesterday. She is desperate, Claire. She is considering suing you for purposely wrecking her family. She believes that everything is happening because you are vengeful, not because she and your parents violated the law. I am not sure what she is planning, but she has been inquiring about your income, employment, and where you spend your time. She's also been attempting to persuade mutual friends to join sides, telling them that you're a heartless monster who is destroying innocent children out of vengeance." This was exactly what Maris would do. Play the victim while refusing to take responsibility for her actions. But now I had advance notice, and I planned to utilize it. "Nina, I need you to do something for me," I told you. "If Maris contacts you again, I want you to record the conversation. Can you do that?" I guess so, but why?" because Maris is about to learn that I'm much better at this game than she ever realized. After hanging up with Nina, I spent the evening further exploring Maris's social media sites. What I discovered was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence that depicted a completely different picture than the sob story she'd been telling everyone. While she was complaining about poverty to me and our parents, she was sharing pictures of costly restaurants, new clothes, and weekend getaways. The timestamps indicated that these posts were from the same periods that she had been asking me for emergency loans. She'd been lying about her financial circumstances to get sympathy and money from family members. More problematic were the posts in which she boasted about manipulating the system and taking advantage of people who have more money than sense. She'd actually uploaded copies of text messages in which she mocked me for being such a fool for assisting her financially. I took screenshots of everything and prepared a complete file. Then I did something unfathomable to me 6 months ago. I started my own social media campaign. I published a lengthy post about what happened at Maris's party, complete with images of my damaged face and testimonials from the few nice people who observed the assault. I didn't need to embellish or lie. The reality was bad enough. But I also added Maris's own posts, which showed her luxurious lifestyle while professing financial difficulty, as well as her disparaging comments about people who aided her, all of which were previously public on her social media accounts. I let her own words reveal her personality. The post went viral in our social circles. The response was astounding. Dozens more individuals responded with their own experiences of Maris's deceptive behavior, unpaid bills, and history of leveraging family strife to get her way. Several guests stated that they felt uncomfortable during the gathering, but didn't know how to intervene. More importantly, Maris's present neighbors and Henry's old co-workers began discussing their own experiences. Maris had been borrowing money from neighbors with sob stories about medical problems and automotive troubles, which she had been telling me. She owed money all around town and was lying about why. The social media campaign also served another purpose. It established a public record of Maris's behavior, which she would find difficult to contest if she attempted to sue me. Her own statements, posts, and established habit of manipulation. Maris visited my workplace 3 days after my post went up. I was in a meeting with a client when my assistant knocked on the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Miss Thompson, but there's a woman here who says she's your sister. She's quite upset." Maris was pacing in the foyer, gesticulating frantically at my secretary as I watched through the glass wall of my office. She looked even worse than she did at my house, unkempt, angry, and desperate. "Please reschedule my 3 p.m. appointment," I informed my customer. "I have a family emergency to deal with." Maris started screaming the moment I arrived into the lobby. "How dare you post that garbage about me online? You're destroying my reputation." "Your reputation destroyed itself," I said quietly, well knowing that my colleagues were watching. "I simply shared the truth about what happened." "You posted private conversations. That's illegal." "I posted conversations you shared publicly on your own social media," I quickly clarified. "Nothing I shared was private." Maris's face was flushed with wrath. "You're vindictive, and everyone can see it now." "Nobody believes your victim. The comments on my post suggest otherwise," I stated. "In fact, quite a few people have reached out to share their own experiences with your behavior. You turned people against me." "I didn't have to turn anyone against you, Maris. Your actions did that all by themselves." That's when she made a crucial error. Maris took out her phone and began recording, apparently intending to catch me saying something she could use against me. "Say that again," she demanded, raising the phone. "Tell everyone how you systematically destroyed an innocent family because you're a bitter, childless woman who can't stand to see other people happy." I smiled straight into her camera. "I stopped assisting financial abuse and reported criminal activities to the proper authorities. If you wish to record this talk, let's make sure we have the facts straight." I took out my own phone and began recording. "Maris, are you denying that you and our parents plan to publicly pressure me into giving you my property? That's not. Are you denying that Dad has been stealing money from Mom's medical fund to give to you? He was helping family. Are you denying that you've been lying about your financial situation while borrowing money from multiple sources? Everyone struggles. Are you denying that you stood by and applauded when Dad assaulted me?" Maris's face turned white. She started recording hoping to catch me saying something incriminating, but instead she created evidence of her own guilt. You can't prove any of that," she said. "Actually, I can," I replied, still recording. I have bank records, social media posts, witness statements, and now this conversation, where you haven't denied any of it." Maris realized she had walked into a trap. She stopped recording and reached for my phone, but I moved back. "Don't touch me," I declared loudly enough for everyone in the foyer to hear. "You've already been involved in one assault. I won't give you the opportunity for another." Security arrived at that point. My assistant had contacted them when Maris began screaming. Maris turned back to make one final threat as they took her out. "This isn't over, Claire. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." "They already do," I said back. "That's the problem." The footage of our lobby confrontation, captured by building security cameras, somehow made its way to social media. Maris's aggressive actions, inability to reject the claims, and effort to take my phone created a clear picture of who was the true aggressor in this circumstance. The repercussions were quick and terrible. Maris's remaining friends distanced themselves from her. The few family members who had been attempting to remain neutral suddenly took sides, and it wasn't Maris's. Henry's parents, who had taken them in, began to raise uncomfortable questions about the type of person their son had married. But Maris wasn't finished yet. My attorney called me about a week after the office event occurred. "Claire, I've received some interesting correspondence," he told her. "Your sister has hired a lawyer, and they're threatening to sue you for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and something called tortious interference with family relationships." I nearly laughed. "She's suing me for telling the truth about her behavior." Apparently. Her lawyer sent a demand letter asking for monetary damages and a public apology. They're also demanding that you cease and desist all investigation into their financial affairs. What do you think of their case? Frankly, it's crap. Everything you've revealed is either factual or based on your own documented experiences. The truth provides an absolute protection against defamation. As for the emotional distress claim, they will have a difficult time establishing it because they were the ones who coordinated a public campaign against you. In this context, interference with family relationships is not a valid cause of action. You cannot be sued for exposing criminal behavior simply because the culprits are connected to you. My attorney hesitated. "However, I believe they are trying to frighten you into backing down. Maris's lawyer is presumably hoping you'll settle rather than go through the inconvenience and expense of litigation." "They picked the wrong person to intimidate," I told them. "File a countersuit." Within 6 weeks, the first dominoes had fallen, and my family's world was beginning to unravel. Maris and Henry faced foreclosure, bankruptcy, tax liens, job loss, and CPS involvement. Dad was being investigated for elder abuse and fraud, with criminal charges anticipated. Mom was now in a professional care facility, and her finances were safe, albeit she was grieved by Dad's deception. And me? I was sitting in my vacation cottage with Finn, drinking wine and admiring the sunset over the mountains. I'd also started spending time with Luke, a nice guy I met through a hiking club who found my independence exciting rather than intimidating. Maris called me dozens of times. So did Dad. Even relatives who had stood by and watched my humiliation began to reach out, anxious about family unity and forgiveness. I blocked them all. Mom was the only person I kept in contact with, and I visited her at the care facility on a regular basis. She was experiencing more good days than bad, and on her good days, she was grateful that I had protected her from her father's financial abuse, even if she was very grieved by his treachery. "I always knew you were the strong one," she said on one of our visits. "I just wish I'd been brave enough to recognize what was happening sooner." Maris visited my place 3 months after the celebration. She looked terrible, skinny, weary, with dark circles under her eyes. Her automobile was a beat-up Honda that I didn't recognize. Probably all they could afford after losing their finer vehicles to repossession. "Claire, please," she murmured as I opened the door. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," I responded, beginning to close the door. "Wait," she said, placing her hand against the door. "I know you're angry, but my kids, they don't deserve this. They're going to be homeless." "Your kids are innocent," I agreed, "which is why CPS is making sure they're in a safe environment with parents who can provide for them." "The parenting classes are humiliating," she added, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And Henry can't find work because of his record. Now we're losing everything." "You have already lost everything," I pointed out. "You lost it the moment you decided to attack me in front of a room full of people for not giving you my property." "It was just words, Claire. people say things when they're stressed. Dad hit me, I quipped. And you applauded. You stood there and clapped while your father assaulted me because I wouldn't give you something that didn't belong to you. Maris gazed down at her feet. I know that was wrong. No, I replied firmly. You don't get to downplay this. You planned my public humiliation. You described me as a family disappointment. You agreed with Dad labeling me a barren waste. You cheered as he hit me. And now you want my aid since dealing with the repercussions is difficult? What can I do to make this right? She pleaded urgently. I contemplated her question for a long time. Nothing, I replied finally. There is nothing you can do. You cannot take back your words. You can't take back the shame. You can't reverse the onslaught. And you can't deny that you all showed me who you truly are. But we're family. No, I replied, cutting her off. Family does not treat each other in the same way as you treated me. Family members do not gang up on one another. Family members do not physically assault each other. When someone is harmed, family members do not applaud. Claire, I'm begging you. Are you begging me now? I observed. But where was the humility when you demanded my vacation home? Where was your care for my family when you called me names in front of 30 people? Maris broke down and sobbed on my doorway. Part of me felt sorry for her, remembering the little sister I grew up with before she turned entitled and harsh. But the majority of me remembered standing in that room, hand placed against my burning cheek, as people celebrated my humiliation. I'm sorry, she said through tears. I'm sure you are, I said. You are sad that you are facing penalties. You're sorry your idea backfired. You're sorry you're losing your home, career, and nice lifestyle. But are you sorry for the way you treated me? Are you remorseful for years of taking advantage of my generosity? Are you sorry you stood by when Dad called me a barren waste? She glanced up at me, and I could see in her eyes that she was remorseful, but only because she had been apprehended, and only because her world was collapsing. She didn't apologize for hurting me. She apologized for becoming upset in return. Goodbye, Maris, I replied, closing the door. Over the next few months, I learned through common contacts that Maris and Henry had moved in with his parents in another state after losing their home when they were unable to satisfy the adjusted loan terms. Dad eventually pleaded guilty to various crimes involving elder financial exploitation. The family members who had witnessed my humiliation were now suffering with the social consequences of their association with the affair. However, the legal procedure has gone slowly, as it always does. The IRS probe lasted almost a year. The elder abuse case took 18 months to resolve in court. Maris's many financial schemes were scrutinized by multiple agencies over a 2-year period. And me. I was prospering. I'd obtained a promotion at work, thanks in part to the relief of no longer having to deal with my family's financial crisis. My social life improved considerably after I stopped spending every weekend dealing with Maris's latest emergency or Dad's demands for family reunions, where I was treated like a second-class person. Finn and I spent our weekends in the vacation cabin, hiking, reading, and enjoying the solitude. I'd started seeing Luke, a nice guy I found through a hiking group, who thought my independence was attractive rather than dangerous. Most significantly, I had understood the distinction between being alone and lonely. I'd been lonely for years, surrounded by family members who only saw me for what I could offer. Now I was alone by choice, but I had true friends, meaningful work, and a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. Finn remained my trusty friend throughout, and Luke had become a vital part of my life, someone who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give. The truth is that I did not destroy my family. They wrecked themselves with their selfishness, entitlement, and brutality. I just stopped letting them evade the repercussions of their decisions. People occasionally ask me if I feel bad about what occurred. The answer is no. I'm sad that it came to this. It's unfortunate that the individuals I loved turned out to be so different from who I believed they were. But guilty? Never. They made their decisions that night at Maris's party. They chose harshness over kindness. They selected public humiliation over private discourse. They chose violence over respect. They chose to treat me as an ATM rather than a family member. I simply decided to cease pretending that their behavior was okay. Maris was working in retail and living paycheck to paycheck when I last heard from her. Dad's legal problems were continuous, and the stress had a negative impact on his health. The extended family members who had condoned their actions were now faced with the social ramifications of being involved with elder abuse and financial fraud. As for me, I'm writing from my vacation cottage, with Finn asleep at my feet and a cup of coffee becoming cold next to my laptop. Luke is coming up later this weekend, and we're going to go to a waterfall I've been wanting to show him. My life is not perfect, but it is mine. It is authentic. It's based on true relationships with individuals who regard me for who I am, rather than what I can provide them. And what about that holiday cabin they all desired so badly? It's precisely what it was designed to be, a place where someone who has worked hard for what they have may find serenity and contentment, surrounded by people who come because they want to, not because they believe they are entitled to it. Sometimes getting even isn't the greatest way to exact revenge. Sometimes it's as simple as removing yourself from the equation and allowing individuals to face the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes it's about creating a life so much better than your previous one that you realize the people who wounded you did you a favor by revealing who they truly were. Sometimes the best vengeance is simply living well, and I am living quite well.